Good evening and welcome to the City of Warrenville Public Works and Infrastructure Committee of the Whole regular meeting. It is Monday evening, February 10th, 2020. May I have a roll call, please?
Alderman Ashour.
Here.
Alderman Berry.
Here.
Alderman Bevere.
Here.
Alderman Davalos.
Here.
Alderman Goodman.
Here.
Alderman Krischel.
Here.
Alderman Widener.
Here.
Alderman Wilson is excused.
Okay, and now if you could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, now we have citizens' comments. We have one person who's signed up. If you would like to speak now, or would you like to speak on the topic? Okay, first, the citizens' comment, Mike Smith.
Hello. Good evening. Mike Smith, 28W710 Wagner Drive.
Hold on a second, sorry.
Hold on.
Better? Okay. Good evening. Mike Smith, 28W710 Wagner Drive, Warrenville, Illinois. I want to thank the council members and the mayor that voted to add item number 10, a resolution supporting House Bill 3851 to tonight's agenda, as this issue is time sensitive. I also want to thank the council members in advance that are voting yes tonight for this resolution. As I pointed out at last week's council meeting, the 555% increase in plate renewal fees for small trailers was a mistake. The $100 fee increase should have applied only to commercial plates that were subject to a commercial distribution fee, as that fee was eliminated in the infrastructure bill. This House bill corrects that mistake. I'm not promoting special treatment for people who own small trailers. If the state raised renewal fees 50% for the small trailers like they did for cars, I wouldn't even be here tonight. And lastly, my request for support from the city to right this wrong is not just for myself. It is for the 100 of Warrenville residents throughout the city located in every ward that are negatively affected by the state's mistake. Again, thanks in advance to the council members that are voting tonight in favor of the resolution. And if it passes, can the city please send a copy to the Rules Committee that is overseeing this bill? Thank you very much.
Okay, is there anyone else that would like to make a comment at this time? If you haven't signed up, it's okay to come forward. Okay. Now we have official and staff comments. Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just one thing this evening, a reminder that a week from this coming Wednesday would be the State of the City address here at City Hall in the council chambers, our yearly attempt to remind you of all the good things that happened in the past year and apprise you of the things that are coming up in the coming year for the community. It begins at 6 p.m. here again in the council chambers, the 19th of February. That'd be a Wednesday after this coming Wednesday. And everyone is welcome. The bigger the audience, the more fun it is for me. So come on down.
Thank you. Clerk? Okay. Alderman, comments? Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Warrenville and Bloom for their information meeting last week. We had a great meeting to discuss the recent America and Bloom recommendations, and many members of city staff, as well as representatives from the Park District, the Library District, and the Historical Society were there. I thought it was a great opportunity for Warrenville and Bloom to talk about some of their plans for further city beautification and improvement, and to build upon our wonderful victory at the recent America and Bloom Symposium. Warrenville is a great city, and with the help of so many committed volunteers, we're going to make it even better. Thanks.
Okay, and staff comments? Oh, city administrator.
Thank you. As noted in last Friday's weekly report, as staff is working through this budget process, we've realized there's going to be, we're projecting a bigger budget deficit for next year than originally anticipated. So you will see that when you get the budget booklets, which will be issued on February 28th of this month, only a couple of weeks away. But because some things have changed in our projections, some things have even changed in terms of the documents you'll see tonight. On the table, you have revised work plans, the citywide one and departmental ones that are different from the ones that were published with this agenda. As I'm saying, this is happening late in the budget process due to a lot of things, including all the workload that you are aware of. Typically, we would have these internal discussions excuse me, during December and early January, but it is virtually mid-February now. So some of that changed real time. We apologize for that, but we want to make sure that we're looking at a realistic picture for next year. So we can get to that when we get to those items on the agenda, but you'll see some of those things reflected even in the presentations that Christina and Phil are about to give. And I wanted to give you some heads up about that. More information will be coming to you about the details of what we're talking about. It's just something that we need to work through and have everybody understand. The message is really simple, but the details of it are a little bit more complicated. So I have consulted with Alderman Goodman, who's the chair of the Public Safety and Finance Committee, and we will be posting a special meeting for that committee on the Monday of this month where we didn't have a meeting. So on the 24th, we will have a special Public Safety and Finance Committee meeting, basically to talk about the budget issues in advance of you getting the budget booklet. So we can give you a heads up about some things to focus on and to look at that are coming up with that and give you a little more information about it and some details. We're working through those right now, and we can have more information in a more focused way that we can share at that time. Of course, then you'll have the budget booklet, and we have succeeding meetings, council and committee going forward through March and April. And of course, the budget workshop on Saturday, March 14th in the morning, where we'll be discussing details as we always do. The reason for this is just to give everybody more information in advance. So you don't get the book and say, this looks odd, what's going on here? And then we have 3 more weeks to meet our staff. I want to make sure that you get that information and we can talk it through so you know what's happening with that. Again, this isn't the usual time frame we're doing this, but we're trying to keep on top of everything all at the same time right now. Again, we'll talk more when we have that meeting on the 24th. I'm not prepared to answer a whole lot of questions tonight about it, except as we get into the budget discussions and the work plans, we can cover those things. But again, it's more of an informational item right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we get on to the business of the meeting. Number 1 is the Administration Department FY 2021 budget presentation. That's Assistant City Administrator Christina White.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So as I do pretty much every year for those in the audience and those watching at home, I want to start with just explaining a little bit about what administration does. We are a 4-person department. We're a support department. We support city services, we support the public, the elected officials, and the other operating departments. Some of the general duties of administration include human resources, information technology, project management, communications to the public, city records management, and all of those other ancillary processes that sort of help support generally the operations of the city government. So this evening we're going to talk about operations and core services and special projects in administration. These 2 categories highlight sort of everything that we do. We're going to start with the fiscal year 20 accomplishments, which is our current fiscal year. It goes from May 1 of 2019 through April 30th of 2020. So some of the things that we covered in fiscal year 20 and typical year after year is supporting our economic development activities. So city staff and administration works very closely with community development on economic development activities, including communication efforts, working on the work groups, the economic development representatives group, meeting with the different developers, all of those activities. Under art and tourism, we awarded $113,000 in grants in fiscal year 20 to programs like the Concerts on the Commons that the library does every year, the Historical Society walking tour, and some of those other activities that you see every year that are out in the public. Communication and outreach, we've continued to update the website, and we'll talk a little bit about the project associated with that from this year later. Channel 10, Facebook, we've increased our Facebook followers by about 600 people, so we're just over 2,100 as of the end of the calendar year, which is a nice number. We continue to put out information as often as possible on the city signboards, the website, the newsletter, and all the different various media that we try to get information out to so we can reach everybody in the public. So next, information technology is always a big one. You'll often see me at these meetings running around back to the AV room to deal with mics that don't work or something that goes out unexpectedly. So we spend a lot of our time working on information technology and both updating and maintaining the city's current systems, working with the different departments to provide them the technology they need to do their operations and their work. This year we replaced, or we will replace by the end of the fiscal year, roughly 20 desktop computers. We've upgraded the fiber connection between City Hall and the police department, and managed other significant equipment failures that have gone on. Recruiting and hiring, we do this every year. This year we hired 6 new employees between part-time and full-time. Those are not new positions that we've added, but just filling positions that were needed to be filled due to retirements or other transitions. We continue to advertise in a variety of different places to hopefully attract a pool of good qualified candidates from various diverse backgrounds. So that is something that we continue to focus on. And then finally on this slide, the policy updates. The City Council has approved 12 safety policies over the course of fiscal year 20 so far. There will probably be more coming before April, as well as some additional policies that are related to employment, like the city's drug and alcohol policy that required amending and the anti-harassment and discrimination policy. Additional 20 accomplishments under operations and core services. The administration department supports various events and programs. So we work on the volunteer appreciation dinner every year, and that's always a fun event where we get to recognize all the contributions from our volunteers. In addition to that, we support the Friends of the Fourth Committee on their activities for the 4th of July events and Arbor Day events and all of the other various events that go on throughout the city. This year we also coordinated the 2nd annual Health and Wellness Fair for employees. We had a great turnout once again. We hope to continue that event year after year. Moving on to special projects, the ERP. We continue to implement our enterprise resource planning project. That's taken up quite a bit of time. All of the city departments have contributed to that project in some ways, but it's mostly administration and finance that spends, I would say, the most significant amount of time with that project. But once we are done with Go Live, we will be able to streamline the city's processes and also improve the way that we transmit information to the public. There will be a public-facing portal that will improve the way that they get their information from us, like their utility bills or permit processing. That is all expected to improve with that project. This year, we also undertook a dependent verification. This is more of, again, an internal thing. We have, obviously, health insurance plans and insurance for our employees and their dependents. As a cost savings measure under the Illinois Personnel Benefits Cooperative Pool that the city is a part of, the insurance pool that we're part of, we are doing this dependent verification to make sure that everybody who's on the plan currently is an eligible dependent. We also administered the Ride DuPage pilot program this year. Started in April of 2019 in a partnership with Winfield Township in West Chicago. That is a paratransit transportation program for seniors and disabled residents. So we've managed that pilot program, and the city has opted to continue that program moving forward. Probably the most exciting and public-facing piece of this is the public art. The Tourism and Arts Commission introduced its 2nd art program under the aesthetic enhancement right outside the police department, which I have some pictures of here. This will look much nicer once the grass grows back and we get some plantings out there. And the TAC does anticipate having an official unveiling event when the weather gets warmer. So they don't want us all to stand out there and freeze, which I greatly appreciate. Some additional 2020 accomplishments. The services and staffing study, which you've heard quite a bit about, we will hopefully have wrapped up by the end of this fiscal year, and you'll get a report with that study. That was a study done to evaluate the services we're currently offering, the type of service, the level of service to the community with feedback from a variety of different groups, including public feedback, to help us make our decisions moving forward to make sure we're providing the right level of service that our community is asking for. The HELP program was a safety initiative with our Illinois Public Risk Fund. You might recall we had a couple of difficult years with workers' compensation claims and some high claim years, so we had some additional high increases year after year as a result. So the HELP program was a program that we undertook with IPRF to reduce our cost increase by 10% if we successfully completed the program, which we did. So we should get an official notification and letter coming out in the next couple of months from them. We also completed a website redesign this year, incorporating our brand and our theme of naturally. The website follows the color scheme and the logo that we approved a couple of years back. That took a lot of effort from every different department, and we're still working through the content, as you know, and we've talked about at previous meetings. The goal there was to make it easier for people to find information, more user-friendly, more accessible via the mobile application. So we're still working through those efforts, and while I have your attention, I'd also like to put out a special thanks to two of our residents, Brittany Morgan and Keith Swindon. They graciously donated the lovely scenic pictures that you see when you open up the homepage, that without them, we would have struggled to find some good pictures to put up there. So that's thanks to them. And then finally, on the 2020 accomplishments, the city had a 10-year plus phone system that was no longer supported, that needed to be replaced and upgraded, so that was completed in August of 2019. All right, so looking forward to 2021, we are entering into bargaining and negotiations with all three of the city's union groups. We will continue to bring personnel and safety policy changes to you. The safety committee is continuing to look at their safety policies. We also anticipate additional state law changes that will require us to update and amend our policies and bring new policies forward. Bless you. The city will continue to focus on safety training and initiatives with the staff in an attempt to help prevent and reduce future accidents and keep everybody free from injuries. We anticipate more recruiting and hiring. That happens every year. We average somewhere between 8 and 10 recruitments a year. So we see that trend continuing into the upcoming year. And we'll have some additional challenges with the full labor market that we're currently in, the competing for talent across the board. There was also the increase to the minimum wage that occurred last year, so we'll have to amend some of our pay plans, especially with the hourly and part-time staff, to account for that change. That $15 change will take effect in 2025, but there's a graduating annual scale that goes up every year. So we'll work on that. We'll continue to focus on information technology. I'm sure you've all heard groups, local communities, schools, churches, everyone's getting hacked. So that is going to continue to be a concern. We want to make sure that our systems are safe and secure. We continue to talk to our IT professionals to make sure that we are protected as much as possible. We can never guarantee 100% that we will never be hacked, but we can certainly put measures in place to try to prevent and mitigate as much as possible. So we continue to focus on that. We'll continue to support the tourism and arts programs and all of the other volunteer work groups in administration. The ERP will continue to be a significant focus of our time. We are anticipating and hopeful that we will conclude this project in fiscal year 21. We've had some setbacks, as you all know, we've talked about with the timeline being extended, but Finance Director Dahlstrand and I have worked pretty tirelessly with our consultants to get back on track with this project. So we are expecting that we'll conclude it in fiscal year 21. We're still working through electronic agenda packets. That was something that came up 2 years ago, and we've been talking through the possible ways that we could accomplish that. Our staff has been working on that, and we are pretty close to implementing it. It's just a matter of figuring out the right software solution or application solution to use for that, and then we'll talk through, do we want to do that in addition to paper packets, in place of, or what's the right combination to make sure that everybody gets the information that they need. And then we'll continue to support community development with the census project and the Citgo-related cleanup and project that you're all going to be talking about a little bit later tonight. We're also going to be working with staff from all the different departments on the capital maintenance and replacement plan update. Going back to some of the IT things, the virtual local area network, that is one decision package you will get from administration coming up when you get your budget workbooks. That is, at this point, the city's data network is running out of IP addresses. It's essentially capacity, the amount of traffic we're getting with the different devices and everything that's trying to access the network at the same time. We need to increase the capacity. So that's really what that project is. And it's explained in more detail in the decision packages, probably more than you actually want. Security information and event monitoring. This is a police department specific item. They are required to follow the FBI Criminal Justice Information Services security policy. One of the main concerns there again is with data security, making sure that the evidence and all of the pieces of information, the records that they have access to are maintained and kept secure. So that's one of the things that we'll be implementing in fiscal year 21. We'll continue to do computer replacements. Again, we're doing about 20 a year on a 3-year program to make sure that we're keeping up to date all of the computer devices so that they do not break down on us at the last minute. We also still have some computers that are on Windows 7, so those are no longer supported and we need to get new computers. So this slide, I've added to the dais this evening a revised administration department work plan. As John pointed out right before we got into presentations, we had to make some decisions and changes to the budget and the work plans as a result of some budget things that came up recently and some constraints with fiscal year 21. So I wanted to at least acknowledge these were projects that were originally included in the work plan that have since been removed. Some of these things we are still going to have to do, but it'll just be on a delay. So the AV upgrade was a huge, expansive project of reviewing all of the AV and how we deliver that service, and then replacing all of the equipment, which was a significant project. We will still be evaluating the AV, but it'll be more on a case-by-case, piece-by-piece basis. So if something breaks down, we'll maintain it, we'll replace it, but we're not going to do the full-blown project. The server replacements, we do need to make server replacements, but they can hold until next year. We talked about a facilities and space needs study when we were concluded with the services and staffing study. That is still something we intend to take on. It just won't be in fiscal year 21. And then finally, there was a communications coordinator position to help manage the just rapid pace of information flow and getting information out to the community. That is still something staff sees as a priority and a need. But again, due to budget constraints, we're going to delay that potentially a year or potentially more, depending on what goes on next year with the budget. So that's it. Questions? Threw a lot out there. It's all very exciting. Policies, insurance, IT. One of you is excited about IT, I think, hopefully.
Thank you, Christina. That
You're
was very
welcome.
good. Then the aldermen have questions. Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, just a couple of small ones. On the dependent verification program that you talked about, is that something we're going to have to do regularly?
No. So the project is a one-time project. We actually have a third-party company that is helping us do that. They're collecting all of the information. Once we have all the information collected, it'll be a maintenance. So when new employees or current employees add dependents, change dependents, we'll have to verify on a case-by-case basis, but it won't be a project. It'll be maintenance at that point.
Okay. You talked about the services and staffing study under the fiscal year 2020 accomplishments. We are still hoping that that will be done by end of this fiscal year and that that'll be an accomplishment for now. I guess my more general question is, how would you say it's gone from the staff perspective? There have been some issues with the consultant, and we've had delays.
Right.
So if we're hoping that this is going to be done, what's that going to look like being done?
So we will have a final report from them before the end of the fiscal year that we can present to you with all of the study findings. You are correct, there was some delay with the consultant. They had some unexpected things that came up with the project lead, which unfortunately happens, as we've seen with other projects and consultants. So we're reviewing a draft report now, and we anticipate having the final report to you before the end of the fiscal year. So you can see all the recommendations, the action plans that are laid out, the services and staffing feedback that they received from the different focus groups that they met with, including the elected officials and staff.
Okay, so hopefully that will be on a Finance and Public Safety Committee agenda at some point for us to go over, or how do you expect us to be able to process this report? This is something
Sure.
we've all worked on and the community has worked on, and we've gotten a lot of people to help us put together.
I'm going to defer to City Administrator Coakley because he's been working on the project as the lead for this one.
Okay,
Thank you. Ideally, that would be the committee where it should be presented. That would be the fourth Monday in March. I can't commit to that until we get through this process. I just last week got a draft to start reviewing, and we're in the middle of just the budget process that we normally do. I had to tell them I've got to put this off. The draft report is at least 2 months late. We were supposed to have it in, I might have a month off there. We're supposed to have it in mid-November. Some things came up. I did get a rough draft in December, but it was missing some big sections, so Christina and I spoke with them, redirected it, and just through a whole bunch of other things going on in their end of the consultant. We just got it last week, and I'm partway through it. The staff hasn't reviewed it yet either, so there's going to be some time to do that, get some changes. And the point of my comments here is that we just don't have a commitment of the timing yet. Ideally, we're going to target that meeting in March because that's the appropriate time to talk about at least the staffing part of it and the financial parts of all those things. As you'll remember, initially we were going to do that and the facilities study in the same fiscal year, but given some other things, we've got time. We can take it and take them in stride. So again, you should see it. We'll shoot for that date. If not, we still have the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee, this meeting that we could put it on for April if we have to. But we want to get that out before the end of the year. It'd be nice to have that out. Hopefully have that out before the budget's adopted.
that was exactly my thought. Yeah, the question of, okay, so if we're not necessarily going to have the results of that study or a good discussion or a good handle on it before the budget, then that's a lot more delays on
Right.
a lot of issues.
Yes, our plan was to have that all before the staff was putting the budget together, so we had that, and then bringing that forward as support for some budget requests, but the timing on the consultant then isn't working with that at all, so we'll get it to you, but it'll be backfilling as we're talking about things already.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. And my last question just has to do with these 2021 objectives. The capital maintenance and replacement plan update is on here. The security and computer replacement is on here. These are some of them new projects, but they're not things that we want to delay.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So
That's
you
why they're
feel
on the
like we
fiscal
are
year
going to
plan.
have the capacity for these new things as
Correct.
well, in
At the-
addition to all this other.
Yes. So again, for a 4-person department, we accomplish a lot of things in administration. So we are confident that we will get this work done. What's presented to you are the things that staff believes we can accomplish in fiscal year 21. That assumes we maintain our level of staffing of 4, and there aren't any major disruptions or projects that come out of the blue that we weren't anticipating. As you know, sometimes in administration things just happen that we need to shift focus on, and so other things get put on the back burner. But at this point in time, with what we know and what we're anticipating, these are the projects we anticipate getting done.
Okay, because I was just thinking that the CMRP update thing had been in the citywide work plan under Tier 2, so I'm hoping it ends up being Tier 1 and something that we definitely do.
With some of the projects that we were planning to do in fiscal year 21 that have now been delayed, it is likely that some of those tiers may shift around. We just haven't had a ton of time as staff to shift focus on the citywide work plan and make sure all the numbering and the tiers are still accurate. The last few days we've just spent working on what are things that need to be delayed, what are things going on with the budget that we need to focus on for fiscal year 21. So we will have to revisit the citywide work plan. There may be another revision coming up before we finalize that, once we've had a chance to sort of absorb all of the budget changes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Alderman Davalos?
Thank you. So on the AV upgrades, I see why this is in this column. I just had a quick question. I should know this, I suppose. The Channel 10 Comcast and the YouTube, are those completely separate? So if one went down, the other might still be there, or are they all tied in some intricate
So
way?
the operation of Channel 10 as a Comcast cable channel and the operation of YouTube are separate. However, in order for us to replay meetings and transmit meetings via both of those, we need to have the equipment that's in that AV room that records the audio and the visual pieces to collect the information and then transmit it out. So there's, without getting too far into the details, there's multiple pieces of equipment that manage that process of basically taking in the audio video and then transmitting it via standard definition to Channel 10 and then also to YouTube.
So we could lose both, possibly.
Potentially.
Yeah.
If we lose, like we did with the server, if we lose
Right,
the
right.
ability to record the meeting, or if we lose sound completely, then you'd have video potentially, but you wouldn't be able to hear anything, so it wouldn't have any value.
Okay.
If the something happened with the Comcast piece of it or the Channel 10 piece of it, we would still, but we could still record and replay the meetings, we would still be able to do that on YouTube. So it just depends on which piece of the equipment decides not to function.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, no other questions?
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Okay, next we have number 2, Public Works Department FY 2021 budget presentation, and that will be Deputy Public Works Director Phil Kukler.
Good evening. I'm here to talk tonight about the FY21 Public Works Department budget and work plan. The way I've got my presentation structured is to look back at FY20, which isn't totally looking back because we're still in the midst of FY20, and then looking ahead to FY21 and kind of going division by division, street division, utility division, and then some miscellaneous projects in each of those years. So I'm going to start with looking back at street division and the projects that have fallen under street division. As Alderman Berry can attest, we had the 2019 road program, which was primarily in Emerald Green this year. That was the bulk of the program. There was a little bit of work out here in Stafford Place as well, but that project went pretty smooth. We had a good contractor. We are in the midst of and probably getting close to completing the bid documents for the 2020 road program. And there's an item later on tonight's agenda where we're going to be requesting permission to go out to bid sooner than the budget's approved, which we do every year. And we get favorable bid prices by going out to bid in February, March timeframe. The Warrenville Road reconstruction project also happened this year. Aside from some hiccups at the beginning, timing with the beginning of school, the project actually went very smoothly. We had, I think, good contract control in place to control the timing of the project and the pace of the project, and making sure that when residents were going to be out of their driveways, it was going to be for as short a time as possible. And I think that the weather cooperated during that stretch. We had a good contractor on board that was able to expedite the work and get it done. And I think, with some minor pain, we got the project done in a pretty efficient way, and the contractor did a nice job. And then there was the Deal Road turn lane construction project, which had 2 components to it. One was creating a left turn lane into the Target parking lot off of Deal Road, and then the other was to lengthen the dual left turn lanes from Deal Road onto Winfield Road to help traffic operate a little bit more efficiently in that area. And that project overall went pretty smoothly. I think there were some delays at the beginning, but it turned out pretty nice. And Ron mentioned it in his presentation. It is a good project. Continuing with street division, we had a couple of storm sewer projects. One is the private drainage assistance project, which has not been completed yet. We had one application this year that met the requirements. We went through and had the area surveyed. It's been designed, and we actually have a meeting scheduled for the end of this month with the residents in the neighborhood to talk about what we've designed, what their needs are, how we might facilitate getting access back there. This is a project that street division staff is going to be constructing, just like they did a couple of years ago with the Harvest and Lakeview project. It's got small enough pipe, and I think we do a better job of getting in the backyards and dealing with the residents and being sensitive to their needs than a contractor might. And then similarly, we also performed the Virginia storm sewer upgrade this year, and that was a project to upsize the storm sewer from the low point in Virginia, just north of Warrenville Road, through an unimproved alley, and then through private property and back out to Warrenville Road. And staff did that project in the fall, and they did a very good job on it. We've had some talented people in street division who are very versatile, and then Jamie and his crew did a great job on that project. Similarly with the street light, we had some LED retrofits, or several of them, honestly. Cynthia Thomas was here last week from ComEd. we retrofitted 82 lights in Cantera, and that resulted in, I think it was over $12,000 check in incentives back from ComEd. Similarly, we retrofitted 240 of the decorative black street lights, and the incentives for ComEd on those street lights were applied at the point of sale. So each one of those retrofit kits costs like $34 regularly. With ComEd incentives, it cost $14 a piece. And shortly after the Warrenville Road lights were upgraded, ComEd was actually out on site and questioning why the power usage was so low. They thought something was wrong, so they came out and checked it out, and our staff was able to tell them, no, we upgraded to LED. So it is a substantial savings in energy and cost then when those are in place. Looking back for utility division, starting with the sanitary sewer system projects, you may recall that we went out to bid on the Fox Hollow lift station rehabilitation, and we had a low bid that was significantly higher than our budgeted amount. So we regrouped with our consultant, talked with Metropolitan Pump, who's the supplier, and came up with a project that wasn't in the entire project, but got enough done of what we needed to do, replacing pumps and upgrading that station so it could continue to function and run. And there will be a follow-on project in the coming years here to finish that off, but right now we wouldn't necessarily have to do that the rest of the project. The lift station is up and running and functioning well. The I&I reduction program, the infiltration and inflow reduction program was adopted by council. We just finished we're finishing the second year of that. In the first basin, that involved some additional analysis and should have involved some smoke testing, but we ran out of good weather in the fall, so we're going to do that in the summer months. And we've actually, leading up to the fall, started working through some door hangers and some announcements and some informational items to hand out to the different residents, put on the website and on Facebook so people understand what's going on and who to call in the event that there's questions. And then in the second basin, we did some flow monitoring this year. We are currently working through finishing the interceptor update with our interceptor capacity analysis update for Naperville. And Naperville wants to see the flows that are coming from Warrenville, so we're working with a consultant on that right now. The main outcome I want from that is to be able to size and understand how big and how expensive the sanitary sewer holding tank that we might have to construct at some point in the future is, so we can budget appropriately when the time comes. Now, it's important to note that Naperville isn't requiring that right now. Our flows aren't violating our agreement with them, so they couldn't require it right now. But should our flows exceed what our agreement says, then they could. There's provisions in our agreement where they can tell us you have to construct this within a certain amount of time. So it's important for us to understand how big of a facility that is and how much it might cost. But I do think that in talking with their staff, that they are happy with the I&I reduction program and how aggressive we're being with that. And so I think they're willing to wait even a little bit longer than just to see the effects of that and how hopefully it has a positive effect on the flows going to Naperville. Continuing with utility division, there's a couple of water system projects. One important one was to complete the loop of the two long dead-end water mains. There was a water main that runs on Route 59 south of Butterfield Road all the way to Ferry and serves the youth home. And there's another water main that runs from Warrenville Road down Aurora Way and Landon and down to Town Line. And those are two long dead ends. With the Everton project going on, they extended water main through their site to the Prairie Path, and then City in December extended water main from Landon to connect to that same water main. So now there's a loop. There still are dead ends south of there, but they're significantly shorter than they were. And this loop that's now active and functioning is going to provide better redundancy in their system. It'll allow for minimizing people out of service if there is a water main break in that area, and provide better fire protection. We are in the third year and final year of replacing water meter transmitter units. I think we've replaced about 4,500 to date, and there's probably about 200 or 300 left, and we're anticipating finishing those last few hundred by the end of this fiscal year. That's been quite an investment in time by the utility division. They've done a nice job in going through and replacing those units. That's going to every house and business in town that has a water account and replacing those water transmitter units. Looking at some miscellaneous projects, one of the most obvious ones is the realignment and raising of the Prairie Path. Street Division worked with Lexington Homes to get soil hauled here for free and spread that soil. They cut in the new path alignment, put down stone for that path alignment. The path itself isn't finished yet. In the spring, I anticipate there's going to be limestone screenings that have to be placed as the surface of that path. But for now, for the winter, we're going to leave with just a CA6 stone base. And then they also hauled in some black dirt to spread around. And the grading is nearly complete out there. That's a little bit rough in some areas, but we are going to, as soon as weather permits, to get some seed down and some straw down to start encouraging grass growth sooner rather than later, knowing that we're still going to have to get out there, either staff and or a landscaper to help clean up some of the areas and do some fine grading and then to finish it up. And then there will be trees planted. We're not going to plant anything within the proposed trailhead project area, but outside of that area, we're going to look at planting some trees along the path and trying to fill in some of the empty spots out there. We participated and continue to participate in the ERP implementation. We are working with the consultant right now to convert the work that Mike Smith did in our AutoCAD utility atlas to make the GIS atlas. So by the end of this month, they anticipate being probably about 90% complete with that. And then there'll be some back and forth to make sure we're fine tuning it to make sure it's what meets what we want, but it'll make that more accessible for everybody in the city and not just people who have a certain software. So Mike did a great job of getting that stuff done years ago and doing a lot of work himself. This is the next step in that and building on that information. And then we worked with a consultant and proposed a complete streets policy, which council adopted last year. And you'll see in the next year there's a follow-on piece to that for an implementation plan. These three projects are projects either just underway or just about to start. I'm hopeful that next Tuesday you'll be looking at a contract between the city and Train to be able to replace and upgrade the police department's HVAC system. We're working through the final details with them this week, and I'm hoping that'll be done by Wednesday so we can get it in time for the next week's agenda. We have a consultant, Davey Resources Group, that is going to be doing a tree inventory and management plan for us. They just asked today, we met with them last week, and they told me today they want to start tomorrow. They're going to have 2 inspectors that go around town. Those inspectors should be wearing Davey Resource Group apparel, and they should be driving vehicles that have the logo and name on it, but they're going to be on every street in town, every city property in town, but they should be public areas, they shouldn't be going in backyards. This should all be public trees and city trees, not private property. So I anticipate we're going to get some phone calls. We've notified the staff here. If any of you hear from residents, Davey Resource Group is working for the city. It is legitimate, but if they do have questions or want to know, they can call City Hall too. And then we had a consultant also do a pavement condition survey. That work was done in December. They provided the data to us resulting from that work last week. Staff still has to review that information, and we need to download the software, we need to purchase and download the software, and we're going to schedule training with the consultant. That's part of their contract, is to provide training on how to use the software and how to use that information. So that's coming probably, I would say, in March that we'll be doing that work, but that'll be done by the end of this fiscal year as well. Now looking ahead to fiscal year 21, one of the big differences, we had a lot of construction this current year, past year. There's not going to be as much construction next year, at least in the public works area. There's going to be plenty in the development projects, but for public works, there's not. So looking at the road projects, we'll have the 2020 road program. The memo that's in the agenda packet for requesting to go out to bid early does list the streets that are included in the road program for next year. This time next year, we'll be preparing bid documents for the 2021 road program, which is hard to believe. The city did receive federal surface transportation program funding for Batavia Road between 59 and Fermilab a few years ago. We're reaching a point now where we have to have that designed to be able bid documents prepared for construction a year or so from now. So we have proposed in the budget to hire an engineer to develop those bid documents for us. And part of the reason for that is with federal funding, you've got to go through IDOT's process, which is a whole different animal than just doing a regular city project. The project itself is actually fairly simple with just a mill and overlay, but there's IDOT paperwork and procedure that you have to go through, which we're going to have a consultant on board for that, is what we're proposing in the budget. The Mac Road Path and Bridge Replacement Project, we're anticipating completing preliminary engineering and then starting final engineering next year. So that's an ongoing project. There was a little bit of a hiccup once we figured out that the bridge needed to be replaced. That caused a slight delay while we had to go out and get advertised for an RFP for engineers and get an engineer under contract and then have IDOT approve that contract ultimately. So there was a little bit of hiccup there, but now we're proceeding. They just did some soil borings out there, and they're working on that preliminary engineering, which will be, just given the process of that, probably into fiscal year 21 before it's actually complete and approved. Continue with street division and road projects. The east side streets, so east of Winfield Road and north of Warrenville Road, are not holding up well. I think they were resurfaced about 7 or 8 years ago. we have a 15-year resurfacing cycle for resurfacing on our streets that we plan for in the CMRP, and these roads are deteriorating really quickly. So have a decision package proposed in the budget to hire an engineer to work with us to develop some pavement rehabilitation alternatives and associated costs. So we can find out a cost-efficient way to beef up these streets so they can last, next time around, last a 15-year resurfacing cycle. So that's something that I anticipate as we work through that process with the engineer. We'd come to council with various alternatives and a preferred alternative to recommend and figure out how we're going to pay for that, how much it might cost. There's this longstanding private street maintenance issue with Riggy and Barclay, or two private streets. I think they were resurfaced about 15 to 20 years ago by the city. At that time, the residents were in the process of dedicating those streets to the city. Something went awry with that. The timing, it was near the end of the construction season, so the city, I believe, had to get the resurfacing done, and then the streets were never dedicated to the city. So Public Works still plows those streets, they have historically for years and years. We're reaching a point, though, where the streets are needing potholes filled and things like that. They're overdue for resurfacing, and I want to have a conversation with the residents out there as well as council to figure out the best path forward and whether those streets remain private and then they need to do something with those and maintaining them, or if they do in some form or another get dedicated to the city, how that happens, and what the conditions are that the residents would have to meet to dedicate those streets to the city. So that's a conversation that should be had this year during the summer, so if they do stay private, the residents have time to anticipate snow removal next year and whatever maintenance they have to do, or if we work through the process to make them public and have them dedicated, we have some time to address those two before winter next year. The storm sewer project is really just a placeholder at this point. We don't have any additional applications in for the private drainage assistance. The one we have in that's a viable project is going to be constructed this fiscal year in the spring. I anticipate I don't know, we may or may not get a project in. If we don't get one in, then this just rolls over to the next year. But if we do get one in, we'll evaluate it, look at it, if it's a viable project and cost effective, we can have it surveyed and designed and constructed this fiscal year. So looking ahead for utility division, and the sanitary sewer system projects this year are totally focused on the I&I reduction program. This will be the third year of the program. It'll be the first year where we have some phase of work going on in 3 different basins, and that'll be happening for the next 11 years now. Just the way it's structured. We've got 11 basins divided up, so we'll have, for 11 years in a row, 3 phases of work going on. I anticipate there'll be smoke testing in the first and second basins, and then some amount of construction to address the deficiencies that are found in the first basin. And then in the second basin, there'll be some more analysis too to help to be contemplating improvements in correcting deficiencies for the following year. And then the third basin is just going to be flow monitoring for this year. I anticipate that I'll be bringing forward a proposal from an engineering firm to have that in April for that flow monitoring, so I can get started right as soon as May 1st, getting those installed and start monitoring. But that'll probably be coming at the Public Works Committee meeting in April. Looking at the water system projects, these are the bigger piece of what the utility division is going to be working on this year. We're working through property acquisition right now for a parcel to build a water tower and a well site in the Southwest District. And the Southwest District, of course, is where Everton and Lexington Trace are. And so we're working through that process now. I anticipate that we're going to, we'd probably be closing on that property sometime during fiscal year 21, and then sometime after that design would start on the project. I don't anticipate any construction during fiscal year 21. That's probably going to be the beginning of fiscal year 22, where we'd start construction on the components out there. We're working through that with the engineer right now to adjust our schedule now that we have a better idea of when that we're actually moving forward on property acquisition here. You might recall we have a contract with McGuire Iron to interior renovation on the West Street Water Tower, which is on West Street south of Deal Road in Cantera. And this year they'll make repairs in the interior of that tower starting in May, and then paint the interior of it. 2 years from now, they'll do an exterior renovation where they'll repair the outside and repaint the outside with the new city logo. And there's a requirement by the IEPA to have a water system risk and resilience assessment done, and then the follow-on part of that is to update the emergency response plan for the water system. So we've got a decision package for, I think it's $75,000 to have an engineer assist us with that plan. That plan is due, is required to be finished by June 30th of 2021. So it needs to be done this fiscal year. So if to the extent that staff can, we'll supplement the consulting services and try to keep that cost down. But given staff's workload, I'm not sure that how much we'll be able to take away from the consultant in that area. Looking ahead to other projects, the service level and staffing study that is currently being done by Matrix Consultants is going to help feed what needs to be done, what we feel needs to be done in Public Works in terms of staffing. So I anticipate sometime this fiscal year after the Matrix study is finished and accepted by council, whatever action is taken, that we'll be bringing forth a recommendation on the future staffing needs and structure of Public Works. And that's, it'll be a multi-year phase project for when we would add staff and how we would change things. But that's something that we've started contemplating, but we need some more information to fill in before we are ready to make a recommendation to council or really discuss it publicly. We're going to continue to participate in the ERP implementation. And as I mentioned earlier, as a follow-on to the Complete Streets policy adoption, there's several points in there to develop an implementation plan. And one of the key parts of that is funding. It's got to be discussed with council and figuring out funding sources, level of funding that council might be comfortable funding for Complete Streets, because without a funding source, none of the Complete Streets stuff can really get pushed forward or incorporated into projects. And last few projects here, we had a solar project that was a decision package a couple of years ago that's kind of languished in like tier 3 on my work plan for a couple of years now. And we'd been working with Symbiont, and they recently informed the city that project, which was going to be a solar array on that well site to power the entire well site, is not a viable project financially for them. So staff stepped back and looked at it, and we decided it might be a better idea to, instead of doing a larger project like that, install solar panel, work with somebody to install solar panels on the roof to just power the components of the building and not the well itself, so lighting, heating, and that kind of stuff. And that would be a project that was smaller and easier to pursue and push forward. If you look at my work plan, I bumped that up to a tier 2 project. And then it'd be a way to dip our toes in the water and get a feel for what building and owning solar panels involves. And then it's something, if it's successful, I'd envision pursuing potentially on the other well sites as well in future years. And again, so as we get a better feel for that, that would be a way to start easing our way into solar and actually make progress on it instead of it just being such a big project that's hard to wrap your head around and fit in among other big projects. As Christina referred to earlier, we're going to reassess the capital maintenance replacement plan. I expect this summer at some point to come to council and request that a couple of aldermen be assigned to work with staff in a work group to review the CMRP, and then work with the finance director as well to come up with recommendations to bring back to council on what we need to do to keep that a viable plan. The CMRP is a great plan. It's really, 2011 was when it was adopted, and it really is a good plan. There's just as we've gone through 9 years of it now, there's a couple of things we've noticed over the years that need to be tweaked and updated, so we're proposing that. That shouldn't be a long and drawn out process, but something that I think we want to tackle during the summertime. And finally, our last decision package is to install high-speed garage doors at the Public Works garage, and this would be for the main entrance and main exit, so just 2 of the doors. The doors that are there now, we probably spend $5,000 to $10,000 a year on repairing in some way or another. I don't believe that those type of doors are intended for the frequency with which those doors go up and down every day. There's multiple vehicles that are going in and out of there every day, and it's just the wear and tear. These aren't like people hitting the doors that require repair. These are just wear and tear issues, springs, rods, things like that. So it was a few years ago, I think, that high-speed doors were incorporated in the budget and then weren't implemented. And this is something, just talking with the facilities maintenance supervisor and the street supervisor, that's something that I've seen them at the Toyota in St. Charles, where I take my cars for service. Jamie Clark has gone to, and Doug have gone to the Naperville Toyota to see them, and the doors roll up instead of staying kind of straight and going up on the tracks. When they go up, they roll up at the top, and they go up and down fast. And they're reported to, and I don't know how to verify this, but they report that they could save 25% of gas charges in the winter, because you're losing just that much less heat every time you open and close those doors, because they're not open nearly as long. So that's something, if we're able to move forward, that's something we probably should track and just compare in the future to see if that's right or not. But that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to entertain any questions at this point.
Thank you very much, Phil. Alderman, questions? Alderman Revere?
Yeah, I saw the picture from the smoke testing, and I guess that was the first year you did that. Did it help a lot? Did it show things that you didn't know about? That was my question, did it really help out on finding problems that you didn't know were there?
We actually, that was a picture I pulled off the internet, because we actually were not able to do it this past year because as we approached the fall, the weather got too wet, so we didn't do it in the fall. We're going to delay and do 2 of the basins this summer together. I know Naperville does quite a bit of it, and they've said it's really effective in helping them identify defects in their pipes.
Thanks.
Alderman Goodman?
My question is about the pavement condition survey data. Did I hear you right that the consultant did this and now there's some software package to learn to use it as we go forward? How are you going to implement this new information in our road program?
It'll help us plan for, because each section of pavement, each block has a rating associated with it. And just at a cursory look so far, when I looked at it with Jamie Clark, some of the streets that are proposed in this year's road program are some of the worst that are in the worst rated, which would make sense because they're roughly 15 years old and due to be resurfaced. I don't know if there were a lot of surprises out there. Some of the east side streets rated really low, as you would expect as well. So I didn't see any, just a quick look through, didn't see anything that surprised me, but this will help inform how we, maybe some of the order in which we do streets. If there's a street that's rated like an 85 that it happens to be doable, we're not just gonna do it because it's been 15 years, maybe it goes 18 years. But this will help to be factored into the decision process as to what order streets get done in.
So how much granularity is there in the information? You said like a street is rated 85. Is it per block?
Yes, I'm sorry, it's per block of each street. So it's block by block they went through and analyzed it. So we have a rating for each block in town.
Okay, so if you end up with a patchwork where this particular block, which isn't contiguous to anything else, has a terrible rating, is that going to change our road program? Or how cost-effective would it be to do these road programs in a more piecemeal fashion than we currently do?
I mean, we try generally to do roads that are in areas together, but if there's over the years we've had road programs that are kind of spread throughout town. I haven't noticed a great deal of difference in cost when we've done, like, say, Emerald Green subdivision where it was all together versus doing some of Fox Hollow and somewhere on the east side at the same time. I haven't noticed a lot of difference in price with that. So if we do need to add a couple of stray streets in here, like this year we've added Ray Street as just a quick resurfacing to get it so it'll hold up until we can actually reconstruct it at the end of the TIF. I don't think that'll change the price or have much effect on the price by having a couple of stray streets in there that aren't with the rest of them.
Okay, so having a more granular pavement condition data set is really going to help us be more responsive to places that really need it without adding greatly to our cost.
Correct.
That's great. And I know that my neighborhood, Maple Hill, is on the road program this year, and our homeowners association has reached out to Public Works to try and open lines of communication about how that's going to go, and I really think that that's a wonderful proactive thing to do, and I hope that other parts of town are also able to communicate with staff about what their needs are when this sort of work is going on right in front of their homes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Alderman Widener?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I have a question regarding the Complete Streets implementation plan. And with the road program packages, will the policy be considered as part of the fiscal year 2021 road program?
I don't anticipate that because right now we don't have any sort of funding source to incorporate Complete Streets items into it. So over the course of fiscal year 21, part of the discussion is going to be what funding source might we use, to what level of funding does council want to fund these improvements, and then from moving forward, we would take that into account as we're going through these different areas. And areas that don't have sidewalks, for instance, and trying to plan ahead for those if there's enough funding to be able to incorporate these into our road program.
Is there a way to bring up in discussion consideration of those potential road projects that might be eligible for sidewalks? Because I think we overlooked the opportunity a couple of years ago, which kind of kicked off the whole sidewalk implementation or Complete Streets implementation program. I believe it was on Williams Road, and we had a number of residents that came forward that were in favor of sidewalks. And because we didn't identify a funding source or have the Complete Streets program, we weren't able to add sidewalks at that time. And we've seen in the strategic plan and all the surveys that we do what a high priority the pedestrian connections make. And I just think that, is there a way that we can at least have a discussion and consider potential financing opportunities for those key connections and priorities that the residents and everybody has kind of understood as an important part of our community's makeup?
Yeah, I think so. I think, again, part of the implementation plan would be to identify how we'd go about that. And with the road program, I mean, in the past with sewer and water extensions, some of the times the timing of those were considered were with the road program. If you knew in a couple of years you're going to be resurfacing street X, and that didn't have sewer and water, you'd start to consider whether sewer and water was appropriate to extend in a couple of years. And if the decision was made to move forward with that, well, then you have to have engineering done. It's not just a simple road program anymore. In that case, it's sewer and water extension design. In this case, it would be sidewalk design and potentially some storm water drainage improvements that would be associated with that.
So if there's a project on this year's road program that's similar to the Williams Road thing, we'll bring it to our attention, and we'll consider potential funding options and ways that we might be able to get that done.
I think in this year's road program, it's going to be late to do that because we're going to be going out to bid here in the coming weeks. It's to delay to the point where we'd be able to do that in, like say, the summertime. I think our pricing will be a lot worse on the road program. I think the timing just doesn't work for this year. I think going into the FY22 road program would be the time where you could work ahead. Once we've gone through this process with the implementation plan to develop it with the Complete Streets, we could then look ahead to the roads that are due next year and that we plan on doing next year. And if they don't have sidewalks or if there are pedestrian improvements or Complete Streets items that could be made, we could have a conversation about that during this fiscal year in preparation for next year.
Are there any roads that are on this year's program that would be similar to the Williams Road project where we might want to consider sidewalks? Because I think at the time we all realized that it was a necessary thing to do to at least have the conversation and include the potential for planning for sidewalks as we moved ahead with road developments, and that was the perfect time to consider sidewalks along with the roadways.
I think that, Ray Street is one of the ones that's on this year's road program. That is something that in the future we plan to pay for with TIF funds to reconstruct and put sidewalk on one side. There's already a plan in place to address Ray Street. Riverside between is it Batavia and Branch, I think, is on this year's road program, and that doesn't have sidewalks. That's another rural cross-section. There's no plan at this point to install sidewalks there, but that's one without sidewalks that if we had a funding source and if we had the implementation plan in place, I think that'd be one we'd certainly consider.
Okay. I hope we can determine potential funding sources so that we can move ahead with what has been identified as like a number 1 or number 2 strategic plan priority as rated by residents, and also in all the different evaluations that we've done as far as judging the importance of, what is important in people's mind as far as the development of the community. I think the sooner we can get to those conversations and make judgments and look at it, and including those things every time we discuss a road redo, I think it would be beneficial. When I have another question too. When Symbiont pulled away from the solar, what part of it wasn't financially viable? Do you have any details on what they described to you as far as why they could not move ahead with that project and with solar?
Well, if you recall, what we're trying to work out with them was a situation where they would build and own the equipment on the site, and then they would charge the city over like a 20 or 25-year period, a certain, I don't know if it was annual fee or monthly fee, but it worked out over that period of time where they would then, factored into that, would be a profit for them, plus whatever incentives and other things they could utilize or credits they could use to reduce their costs. And at the same time, keep that charge to the city low enough that it would actually save money over what we pay ComEd right now, or at least potentially, depending on what council want to do, at least at worst break even. They didn't give me any details as to what doesn't work now, but they said it's not financially viable for them to do that.
So we don't know by how much it wasn't financially viable? We didn't receive
No,
any kind of figures?
No, they just said it wasn't. They weren't.
Okay.
It must have been by enough that they didn't feel it was worth discussing.
Because I think it, for such a high priority, among a lot of the councilmen, it would be good to be able to put a figure on it so that we knew how far away we were from that project to be able to make it financially viable, because you never know about the potential for grants for alternative energies. There's been a lot going on in the grant world, or whether or not we could explore funding options to make up the difference in order to make that project viable. If it was a matter of $1,000 or $2,000, and maybe there would be some way to afford it in order to kick that project, down the road a little further.
Yeah, I
I'd
can
be
follow up with them,
interested
but
in
my impression is it's not just $1,000 or $2,000. That would have been something worth talking about, I would imagine, from their side of things, and certainly from the city's side of things. But I think it was $100 and some odd $1,000 project to construct. So I would imagine it's probably more like tens of thousands of dollars as opposed to just one or two.
Okay, if you could find out, I'd be curious to know, because, we've been trying to move into the solar realm of things, for a few years now. It's been a priority, and it's a disappointment to see that was pulled. And then, are there any ongoing or proposed programs related to city parks, trails and pathways, or the Route 59 sidewalks in the upcoming budgets and plan?
Christine, is David applying for STP funds did he prepare? Yeah, for Route 59, we're, for this call for projects for the STP program, we are submitting an application for Route 59 sidewalks in Maple Hill. Yeah, the connection between Maple Hill and Fox Hollow.
Okay, anything with regard to city parks or the trails systems, pathways?
No, I mean, we're going to work with community development to help support them, try to facilitate a decision on whether or not, we've got a couple of agreements with the Forest Preserve District on the Warrenville Grove Forest Preserve Trail on the west side of the river, that we're reaching kind of a sunset period where we need to make a decision on whether to proceed with that or not. And in that case, I think the Forest Preserve had dedicated or committed to paying like $200,000 toward that project if it moves forward. And then the other one was the Fox Hollow Maple Hill connection that we need to figure out what if we're going to move forward or not at this point, so we can let the Forest Preserve know.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Phil.
Welcome.
All right, number 3, consideration of waste management contract amendment to change pickup days. Assistant City Administrator Christina White.
Thank you. Waste Management has requested a contract amendment to change our service days, essentially consolidating the pickup of the garbage and recycling. Right now, we have 4 service days, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. They're proposing to eliminate the Friday pickup schedule and have those folks all picked up on Monday. Included in the agenda backup is an amendment to the contract and a revised garbage pickup map that shows the color coding of what areas of town would be picked up on which days. And we do have a representative from Waste Management here, Vaughn Kirschner, and I'm going to ask him to come up and help explain a little bit what predicated this change on their behalf.
Thank you, Christina, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Vaughn Kirschner from Waste Management, and as Christina said, we are requesting a service day change, and as she also detailed, we are looking to eliminate the Friday service day, moving those approximately 700 residents to Monday. And so then we would be servicing the city on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, thus eliminating 1 day a week where our trucks would be in the city. As far as information goes, we will send out a brochure, not a brochure, but a mailer postcard to all the affected residents, not everybody, but just those affected residents, approximately 700. about a week before the change. We find that that is the best or optimum time to do it, just a week before. The service change would happen on April 3rd. That would be a last Friday pickup. And then the first Monday pickup would be April 6th. So they would actually have an April 3rd and an April 6th pickup, so three days apart. And then every Monday going forward from there. So as far as why does this, or why are we coming to you with this change, is every once in a while we have to reevaluate our routes and rebalance them to keep our efficiencies, you know, as high as we can, so we can continue to provide the consistent quality service to our customers. And so typically this is a result if we lose a contract with another municipality, we have to evaluate these things. And as a result, we don't like to do this, but we try and minimize the effect of it. And in this case, it's just that one day for those approximately 700 residents. So.
Any questions? Alderman Bevere?
Yeah, because you're kind of doubling the route up. Is there going to be like two sets of, you like you usually had a recycle guy and a garbage guy. Is there going to be four out there now? Are they going to be all, how late will it go in the day? Is it going to still be pretty quick?
It's still going to be quick, sir, and then all the services will be picked up on the same day. So refuse, recycling, yard waste.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alderman Davalos?
Thank you. I'm just concerned about the holidays, the load. I mean, I'm a Monday pickup, so a lot of, sometimes holidays are on Monday. But anyway, so would a Monday, if it was a holiday, be picked up on Tuesday or Wednesday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay. And, all right, and a Thursday holiday, like Thanksgiving, would be Friday?
Would be Friday. Always a business day later.
Okay. A lot of trucks. Okay, thanks.
Welcome.
Anyone else? I'm sorry, Alderman Goodman.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the City Council approve the contract amendment with Waste Management to change the service days as proposed.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Goodman and a second by Alderman Bevere. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, number 4, consideration of extension of special use and variance approvals for Speedway redevelopment project at the northwest corner of Route 59 and Batavia Road. Let's see, we have Community and Economic Development Director Ron Menzer.
Thank you. Items 4, 5, and 6 all pertain to Section 2, Period B, Period 8 of the zoning ordinance. And that section of the ordinance is the automatic invalidation provisions that the city has for any special zoning approvals, such as those that were granted to the Speedway project at 59 and Batavia Road, not quite a year ago, but coming close to a year ago. So under the language of the zoning ordinance as it's currently written, a special approval ordinance automatically becomes invalid if the project is not pulled its permits and began construction within a year of the city council's approval of it. In this case, Speedway is not in a position to move forward with the project today. As I understand it, there's been some internal corporate evolution in Speedway with the parent company of Marathon Oil that has had some impact on delaying the decision on whether to move forward with this project. And then secondly, there's some recent stormwater management ordinance adjustments to the rainfall data that dictates how much detention is required with new development that is going to impact the design of the stormwater management accommodations on the Speedway project. Essentially, they're going to need to revise their engineering drawings to provide more underground detention than what they had previously shown on their drawings. So it's going to take some time for them to make those revisions. and I'm sure that's going to have some impact on the economics of the project. Long and short of it is that Speedway representatives have submitted a letter for the City Council's consideration asking that the special approvals for their project be granted a one-year extension. We have done this in the past. It does require that the City Council ultimately pass. I'm not sure if it's an ordinance or resolution that memorializes that. Whatever we've done in the past, if it's the recommendation of the committee, that will be prepared and included on the upcoming City Council agenda for council consideration. There are representatives of Speedway here tonight to address any questions that you might have about the status of their project. And I would conclude with staff has no objection to the requested extension.
Alderman Ashour?
I'd like to recommend the City Council approve a one-year extension of the Speedway Special Use and Variation Approval Ordinance 2019-03.
Second.
I'm sorry, who made the second?
Fred.
Oh, Alderman Bevere? Okay. Motion by Alderman Ashour, second by Alderman Bevere. Alderman Widener, you had a question? Comment?
Yes, I just wonder if there's any statement within the Warrenville ordinance that considers a one-year extension.
Not currently, it's not black and white, but in talking with the city attorney, both the current city attorney and the past city attorney, it's their collective opinions, and it's been consistent that the City Council has the authority to grant these types of extensions at their discretion. And it has not for the, I'm not sure for this project, but the last extension I recall was a extension of the special use or approval ordinance for the redevelopment and expansion of the BP gas station at the southwest corner of Warrenville Road and Winfield Road. So it has been something that has been done in the past at the discretion of the City Council.
Were there stormwater issues with that one? Is that why that one was delayed?
No, I don't believe there were any stormwater issues, and I honestly don't recall what the issue that held up that project was and why it was delayed.
But this one is delayed because of stormwater capacities and trying to allow for adequate stormwater
I think that's,
on the ground?
according to the Speedway folks, that's one of the reasons. The other reason is just the transition. Speedway used to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Marathon Oil, and kind of in the last half of last year, they were transitioning to their own independent corporation. And as part of that process, there was some reluctance to make a decision to move forward with this project until after that separation happened and Speedway could decide whether or not it made economic sense for Speedway to move forward with the project without Marathon Oil being involved in that decision process, as I understand it.
Okay. I just recall there being some citizen concerns regarding the size and impact of this gas station near to and close to a residential area, and that something of this size is sized more appropriately for exits off of interstates and so forth, and not necessarily, in close proximity to the neighborhoods in town. And I just would appreciate them, coming back and going forward with an approval ordinance for the project in a year and reapply due to the fact that there was, so much concern over this and the fact that the stormwater situation has changed. I'm not sure it's an appropriate fit. We always had trouble with accommodating all the semis that were going to be venturing into the site. And anyway, that's my concern, and I will be voting no on this issue. Thanks.
Alderman Goodman?
My question is, if we do grant them this extension, are they actually going to build the project? I mean, how sure is this? Maybe they can speak to that.
When you come to the podium, if you could please make sure that you give us your name, please.
Right. I've got cards for, should I give it to anyone in particular? Thank you. I'm Chris Kolashevsky from WT Group. We're the site architects and engineers for this project. With me is Tom Halleck from the Real Estate Department for Speedway, as well as Melanie Hart from the Program Manager from Speedway as well, the author of the letter that you have in your package. Yes, we definitely would like to build this site. Speedway, the negotiations are still ongoing and will not be finalized between Marathon and Speedway until the fourth quarter of this year. And therefore, it's really kind of tying up the advancement of this particular project. And yes, all intentions are to build this project. It's just that it really can't be done until a couple of things. The administrative structure of the company is established, but also the new hurdles that it needs to pass for the ROI process. During the year, we'll be working on the new stormwater management calculations, which are just an effect of all the communities in the state of Illinois are coming up to the more current rainwater calculations. And it's just appropriate to reassess the stormwater system. Just as a little reminder, we had underground and above ground. Above ground was very nicely decorated with landscaping blocks and appropriate vegetation. And again, this site was just intended for local facilities for the customer that's already on the roadway. This is not intended to be a truck stop or anything of high intensity use as such. And basically the amount of traffic that's on 59 is warranting this proposed improvement to the site. Currently right now, there are some trucks that fuel at the canopy, the same canopy that the autos are fueling at, and that's exactly what we're trying to separate. If you remember the plan, I do have a plan there, but before I get into detail, I know you've got a big agenda. The CFLs or the diesels would be in the back of the building and the auto would be in the front. So we'd be separating that traffic, which currently somewhat intermingles and of course is not as efficient as could be.
So what you would be having in the back is not semis, but box trucks and landscapers, that type of thing?
That's really our main, what we call the day runners, that are already on the roads. And, you know, the big semi-trucks with the full sleepers, they're looking for a full truck stop facility, which includes a full sit-down restaurant, a showering facility, a laundering facility, and some other amenities, which really those types of buildings are around 12,000 square feet to up. The biggest one that I've designed is over 24,000 square feet. Our building we actually started at 4,600 square feet. We reduced down to 3,900 square feet to try to offset some of the costs. The costs hitting this project over and above regular costs are to the tune of 1.196 million. That's all the additional things. If we had like a perfect site pad ready, all utilities are there, driveways are all there, it's 1.1 million more. And so that's why we're balancing it, and that's why it's a little sensitive for the new Speedway leaders to have the appropriate amount of time to assess it, and then we will continue with it.
Alderman Widener, do you have another question?
Yeah, could you once again remind us of what the fuel storage capacity is today and what it's proposed to be when this is built?
Yeah, could I just, for one moment, grab my drawing to... The plan itself is that we will have the tanks right in this area right here, underground storage tanks. And The tank on the right is a 10,000 gallon DEF tank, which is a diesel exhaust fluid, to combat diesel fumes. And it spritz in there and it makes the exhaust of the diesel trucks basically almost neutral. And that product didn't exist when the original station was built. And so that is one additional tank that will be built. We have a 20,000 diesel, a split between regular and E85, 20,000 regular, and then we have the split tank over there as well. So basically, you have about 20, 40, 60, 80 of the fuel, and then you have 10 for the diesel, the DEF fluid. And compare that to the existing site, I don't have the exact, but we're within between 60 and 80,000 right now. I'm not sure if there's 4 tanks there or 3 tanks. I apologize. But it's basically, you have the 20,000 diesel, the 20,000 regular, and then a 20,000 split tank, which will have the premium and then an E85 product. There's no mid-grade. The mid-grade is actually done in a mixing valve at the dispenser. So we're very appropriate in terms of the existing capacity versus the proposed.
So existing capacity is 60,000 and we're moving up to 90,000 gallons? Is that what your math tells you?
I'm saying 60 to 80. I can't remember exactly what it was.
But going up to 90?
It would be for the 10,000 extra for the DEF film. For a small site like this is very normal, very typical. The Thorntons is in the same amount. And it's for a small station like that, that is normal. When you have the big travel plazas, we have tanks that are up to 30,000, usually have 6 of those, and they're 180,000. So you can see that the scope of this project is very small compared to a true travel truck stop.
Mayor Brumel?
I remember from your original proposal when you were in front of the Plan Commission, the disparity between what's there now in terms of an antiquated system for handling the fuels compared to your new state-of-the-art system, which is far safer in terms of emissions. When the trucks put the fuels into the tanks, you have special systems to keep all of those fumes from getting into the air, and also from spills. Currently, spills that would happen on site just go into the stormwater off the site, but there's a new system that you have in place that would incorporate catching those and recycling them. If you could explain a little bit some of the difference between what's there now in terms of how the fuels are handled and what will be done to make sure that it's done better in the future, that might be helpful.
Okay. Again, the diesel are fueled in this portion right here. That's where the diesel exhaust fluid is put in. It's actually a separate tank on the truck itself, and then as that's fueled, as the truck is fueling, that is automatically interspersed into the exhaust. So that takes care of that side.
So right now, when they fuel, that just goes into the air.
Yeah, there's actually a national regulation that they have to have that now.
Okay.
So they're buying it elsewhere, or you can temporarily and at a much more expensive price buy it in plastic containers and pour it in, but it's not as economically viable. Now, in regards to the drainage, I'd like to...
You know what, you're going to have to get a little closer to that microphone
Oh,
because...
sorry?
Yeah,
Okay, that's
sorry.
fine. I actually have a stand, if I could... Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And then if you want, you can hold the microphone too. You can take it out of that holder.
Don't want me holding that and holding this at once. That'll be interesting. So what we have actually right now is a storm sewer system. It doesn't have an underground vault. It met all the requirements at the time. Of course, as we are developing, thank you, sir. As we are developing, we're always trying to do better, and also government regulations are coming up more with the technologies. So we actually have 3 filter systems. that handle the stormwater from a standpoint of a drop of rain hits here and it flows to some kind of storm inlet, catch basin. That catch basin during construction and then afterwards has these filters, and that will start the filtering process that actually separate the petroleum elements from the water itself. But also, that's kind of the first step, so it gets the big stuff. It'll catch the paper and anything like that that might be flowing into it. From the catch basins, we go towards the underground detention is here, and the above ground detention is in this area. We go to what's called we either use a storm scepter or an aqua swirl, and in this case, Speedway's specifications is an aqua swirl, and it's basically a cyclonic type device that actually separates any oil particles from the water. So that remains in the device itself. It is pumped out by a licensed, Illinois state license from an IEPA hauler, and that occurs on, depending on the system, it will be checked every quarter, and if, as it needs to be, then it'll be pumped out. That's the second system. The third system is the underground storage storm vault. It's a system of vaults that also has a settlement area that also will get cleaned out on periodic basis. So you have the filters, you have the aqua swirl with the purposeful separation, then you have one more filter, then you have another filter in the sense that it comes out to the above ground detention, and then finally is released back into the system as it is. Our reduction of not only quantity, but the amount of storm water in terms of the speed is also reduced. So the rate and the amount is reduced through restrictors and through these three systems. So with those, the water, quite frankly, is going to be cleaner with these proposed improvements than they are today.
And the current situation has none of those systems.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Goodman?
I remain convinced that this is a old, long-standing business in Warrenville that is in great need of a refresh. If you're committed to moving this project forward and bringing new, safer, greener technology to this location, then I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Alderman Bevere?
Yeah, you mentioned, are you gonna have an actual pump for deaf?
Yes, sir. It's going to be at each of the CFL islands.
Now, is that a petroleum product? How does that get, or is that just another product that you're gonna be pumping where that isn't motor fuel tax? That was my question. How does that get,
Yeah,
charged?
it's not considered a fuel, so it doesn't go for that tax, but it is a fluid that gets pumped into the truck. And again, into a separate tank. It doesn't get pumped into the gas tank or diesel tank in this case. It's a separate tank.
It's nice because a lot of guys are buying gallon jugs and they're spilling it all over the place, so
Yeah.
it's nice if you have a pump there with that product.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, we already have a motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you very much. That was very informative. Number 5, also Ron Menzer, this would be the consideration of revalidation of special use and variance approvals for Thornton's project at the southwest corner of Route 59 and Duke Parkway.
Okay, this is somewhat similar, but also different at the same time issue. The Thornton's project at the southwest corner of 59 and Duke Parkway was approved more than a year ago. So as per the provisions of, the current provisions of the zoning ordinance, their special use permit has technically expired. And therefore, it can't be extended by action of the city council. In talking, they are, however, very anxious to continue to move forward with the project exactly as it was approved by both the recommended approval by the Plan Commission and approved by the city council over a year ago now. Their issue has been kind of focused around the fact that unlike Speedway, that's being separated from the parent company, Thornton's, which was a family-owned business, had 260 stores around the United States, was acquired by BP Amoco this past year. And so there's been a whole time-consuming process to meld Thornton's into the BP umbrella, and the decision process on specific projects was put on hold while they went through the process of kind of meshing the two different companies into one, and who was going to have what responsibility for what. In addition to that, the city has actively been working with Thornton's and now BP to discuss the possible creation and the city's acquisition of the end of this property so it could accommodate the construction of a new water tower for the city. That has certainly had some impact on the delay in getting to the point where they have final engineering design that can be approved by the city, because the design has evolved on a couple of different occasions based on the needs that the city would have for a new water tower and well facility on the corner of their property. All in all, the fact of the matter is it remains the special use is expired, and they would need to have a new special use issued, or the revalidation of the previous special use approved by the city council. Talking with the city attorney about this circumstance, they are looking to move forward with the exact same plans and subject to the same conditions that were included and approved by the ordinance the city council passed just over a year ago. The city attorney felt that in this case, to expedite the process, it would be acceptable to have the city council hold a public hearing and then consider, and there would have to be the standard, there would be the standard notice issues, a sign on the property, public notices sent to property owners within 250 feet of the property, publication in the newspaper, and ultimately the city council would hold a public hearing, accept any public input on the same project that was approved before, close the public hearing, and then make a decision on whether or not to approve a ordinance that revalidates the previous approvals or modifies the previous approvals, or it could be that the city council wouldn't approve that. From a staff perspective, given the history of this project and it has not changed in the city's involvement with it, we are supportive of that action of having the city council conduct a public hearing, and that is what the recommendation is. There is no representative from Thornton's here tonight. They're out of state, and they would be here for a public hearing and be able to answer any questions that the city council or the public that might show up to that public hearing might have about their project. So the recommendation to the city council tonight is to authorize that public hearing to be held at your next meeting.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos?
Thank you. So the public hearing would look a lot like the public hearings in the Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, correct? It just would be here.
Yes.
And then the public would speak, and then the council would be discussing this as the Plan Commission would be discussing it.
Yeah, I mean, the public would have an opportunity to provide input, ask questions, and then the city council would ultimately close the public hearing and then take action on whether or not to approve or revalidate the approval of the prior ordinance.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments or questions? Alderman Ashour?
I'd like to recommend the city council conduct a public hearing to consider the revalidation of the zoning approvals contained in city ordinance 2018-52 at its February 18th, 2020 meeting.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Ashour and a second by Alderman Vizier. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Number 6, consideration of zoning ordinance text amendment to invalidation provisions for special use permit and variation approvals.
Okay, so kind of as a outgrowth of the last two issues, we took a look at the zoning ordinance, and from a staff perspective, we felt it would be reasonable and somewhat desirable, actually, to avoid these types of circumstances going forward, to modify the zoning ordinance provisions to allow for the preliminary approvals, preliminary PUD approvals, or special use permit approvals to have a validity period of 2 years rather than 1 year. So that's what we're proposing. There's a draft ordinance that staff work with the city attorney's office to prepare that's included in the agenda backup materials. The main focus of that ordinance is to extend the period of time under which before a specific approval would become invalid from 1 year to 2 year. As we looked at the language of the current ordinance, there's some other modifications that we made that really are more clarifying, some ambiguity that was currently in the ordinance that we would kind of clean up as we went through this process. Ultimately, in order to move forward with this type of amendment, the City Council would need to authorize the staff and the Plan Commission to actually conduct a public hearing that would amend the zoning ordinance to make these types of modifications. Any modifications to the zoning ordinance text does require a public hearing to be held, the Plan Commission to then make a recommendation, and then the City Council would have the final say-so on whether those amendments would be implemented. So the recommendation is to authorize the Plan Commission and staff to hold a public hearing to consider these modifications.
Okay. Questions, comments? Alderman Ashour?
I'd like to recommend the City Council authorize the Plan Commission to conduct a public hearing to consider staff recommended amendments to the zoning ordinance section 2(b)(8).
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Ashour and a second by Alderman Bevere.
No one. Never mind. I'm going to get the staff to pull the screen down.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Number 6, consideration of zoning ordinance text amendment of 7, consideration of staff recommendation to postpone decision on purchase of former Citgo gas station property at 28W 244 Warrenville Road, and that would be Director Menzer.
Thank you. You might recall that it was looks like it's off. You might recall, well, you'll probably recall that last fall in October, the City Council approved a purchase agreement for the Citgo property at Batavia and Warrenville Roads. Under the terms of that purchase agreement, the city had just about 4 months of time to perform any and all due diligence and site investigation activities that it felt was necessary to ultimately make an informed decision on whether or not it was going to actually close and take ownership of the property. The terms of the agreement allow the city to perform that due diligence and ultimately make a decision on whether it's going to close on the property. There's no obligation that the city close on the property. So for the past 4 months, the city's, I would term it the due diligence team, which is city staff, the city's redevelopment attorney, the city's environmental attorney, and our environmental engineering consultant, Terracon Consultants, have actively been performing all sorts of due diligence activities on the property. The presentation tonight is to give you a overview of the scope of due diligence activities that have been performed, the kind of key takeaways and conclusions that the due diligence team has developed as part of that process, and conclude with what staff's recommendations are going forward with this project at this decision at this particular point in time. I wanted to start by talking about this site plan. It was included as Appendix A in the agenda backup materials for this particular item. There was a color copy that was distributed at your place tonight that more clearly identified the limits of the 100-year floodplain on the property. And what we did, and why this site plan is important, is because as part of the due diligence activities, we needed to more clearly define what type of private development and what type of public open space might end up on this property. Essentially, how much of the property might be used for public open space versus private development. And that's what we've done here. This site plan is substantially consistent with the illustrative plans that were included with the incorporated into the Old Town Civic Center suburban plan that was approved by the City Council in 2007. And when I say that, those plans called for some type of private mixed-use type development along the street frontages of the property, and then kind of going through the property in the floodplain portions, using that portion of the property for some type of public open space that would be connected to additional public open space in the floodplain portions of the properties to the north. So that's what we've developed, and that's important because the due diligence key takeaways and the cost estimate information that's incorporated in your agenda packet was based on assuming that this type of land use would happen on the property. Maybe not exactly in this, but one of the assumptions here is that about half the site would eventually be used for some type of public open space. And the cost estimates that you have in your agenda packet information assume that would be the case. Does it have to be exactly this configuration? Not necessarily, but if you were going to say the whole property was going to be used as public open space, that would increase the costs to some relative degree, because it costs more to clean up the open space component of the property than potentially leave some of the contamination underneath pavement and parking areas. So the scope of due diligence activities was, the largest part was the work that Terracon performed for the city of Warrenburg. And there were 3 different analyses or investigations that Terracon performed for the city. They're all listed there. A copy of a summary of the results of that work is included in the agenda packet backup as Exhibit B, or Appendix B, to the memo that was included in the packet, so you have a more detailed synopsis than what I'm going to provide tonight. Further, the final detailed reports, one of which is over 200 pages, are copied and available in the city council's or the alderman's office in a binder. And if anybody wants independent copies, all you need to do is call community development. We'll make copies for you and provide them to you independently. But I'm going to summarize kind of the key takeaways going forward. In addition to that, we, as part of the due diligence process, we had lots of conversations with different representatives of the state of Illinois, the Office of State Fire Marshal, along with several different divisions of the Illinois EPA, talk about what the current conditions of the property are, what their expectations for the future of this property are, whether it's the city or some other individual, what obligations would be have to be taken care of going forward to address the various issues in the property. And finally, what type of outside funding assistance they may have available that they could contribute if the city was to get involved with this property. And then finally, last but not least, we've had a lot of conversation, not a lot, we've had 3 or 4 conversations, 3 telephone calls and a couple emails with representatives of Phillips 66 about the status of their existing leaking underground storage tank that's open on the property that stems back to the late 1980s. And what their plan is for that, and would they be interested in cooperating with the city if the city got involved and even contributing to help finance part of the work that might need to be done if the city would get involved, if it ended up helping them close out or taking care of closing out their existing lust incident. So now I'm going to focus on kind of the key conclusions and takeaways, at least from my perspective, with the 3 different reports that Terracon performed on the property for the city, and some of the related cost implications of the findings in those reports. I would say that we have a representative of Terracon here tonight. and he would be available to answer any questions should the city council have any specific questions about the work that they performed or the findings and conclusions that they've made. The first report was a standard Phase 1 environmental site assessment. Does involve a visit to the site, looks at historical records, all available historical records related to the site, interviews of potentially surrounding property owners, of city representatives to find out what was the history of the site. As part of that, they identified what's called recognized environmental conditions as kind of a heads up, here's things that are going to have to be dealt with. I can say that in this case, there was nothing new, surprising that came out of this analysis. Everything that came out of it are things that we already knew and expected and anticipated. Most notably was the existing outstanding lust incident that Phillips 66 is currently responsible for from way back when, and the fact that the existing underground storage tanks on the property have been condemned by the Office of State Fire Marshal. When tanks are condemned, that means they're illegal, essentially. They need to come out of the ground. Currently, the ownership of the property is being fined daily, or fines are accruing daily because they have not taken the initiative to remove those tanks from the ground. To deal with the lust-related incidents, the underground storage tank incidents, the cost estimate information that's included in Appendix C of the packet estimates that the total cost would be about $470,000, all inclusive. It's important to note that conservatively, we're estimating that at least 75% of those costs would be reimbursable by the state of Illinois' LUST program, which is a program that receives funding directly from the part of the gas taxes that we all pay when we buy gas. So it's separate and apart from the general fund of the state of Illinois, and they've allocated and earmarked $1.5 million for this property. So more than enough LUST funding has been earmarked for this property. So it's pretty certain that we'll be able to access that, or we or anybody else would be able to access it. It's not just restricted to municipalities. The second investigation was performed was what's called a supplemental Phase 2 investigation. That actually entails going onto the property, drilling additional soil borings and analyzing those soil borings, taking additional water samples, groundwater samples, and evaluating those samples to understand more clearly what the scope and level of contamination on the property is and what it's going to take to clean it up to meet the standards that we would need to meet in order to have the property reused like the concept plan or something similar to the concept plan I shared with you. There's really not anything earth-shattering new that we found as part of those results. There are petroleum contaminants that exist on the property. Most of them are related to the existing underground storage tanks. There's a couple of isolated areas where there's some other remnant petroleum-related contaminants. There's also heavy metals in the soils on the property that probably relate to when the property was filled in way back when. They brought in bad fill that had some kind of heavy metals in it that would need to be dealt with. The one surprising issue, somewhat surprising issue, is the level of iron that has been found in the groundwater underlying this site. Iron is considered one of the heavy metals, but in this case, the level of iron in the water is extremely high. It exceeds the state of Illinois general surface water standards, water quality standards. But it is not something that the city would be, if we bought this property, that we would be required to deal with. It doesn't pose a health risk. It's just above water quality standards. It's not even certain that this site is really the source of that. It could be that other sites in the area are contributing to that. It could be that the existing iron levels in the aquifer at this location is elevated for some reason. It could be a combination of the three. It could be elevated natural occurrence, could be contributions from surrounding sites, and what's happened on this site. So the assumptions are that we would move forward and address all the issues that were identified on the property through the Phase 2 supplemental site investigation and all previous investigations that have happened to residential cleanup standards so that it could properly support the goal isn't residential use, but park use. You have to get it to residential standards to signify that it's safe for park use. That would require active remediation. There would be some dig and haul of contaminated soils. It would also most likely involve what I'll term as engineered barriers. That could be a modified dig and haul with some kind of subsurface geotextile barrier, and or the use of parking lots or drive aisles. If there's going to be parking lots or drive aisles and there's contamination that's underneath that area, it could remain and it would continue to just biodegrade over time. And it would require, ultimately, to address all these issues, it would require that the city specifically invoke a groundwater restriction for this site and surrounding properties. And the groundwater restriction basically says that nobody could install a new potable water well on this property or any of the surrounding properties. Fortunately, all the properties in the whole area are connected to city municipal water. If they wanted to install a well today, they would go to the county, and the county would tell them, you're connected to water, you have access to municipal water. The county's regulations say we're not going to give you a permit for a well. So we really wouldn't be imposing any restriction that's not already practically in place. And finally, we would be working towards securing a focused NFR letter that would deal would show, improve, and acknowledge that we've done remediation efforts to bring the site in compliance with residential cleanup standards, except for not dealing with that iron in the water, which isn't really a health issue. That nobody's going to be drinking the water, and it's not going to impact anybody on the surface of the land. The total estimated cost to deal with all those issues, which are really the issues that aren't directly related to the leaking underground storage tanks, is $545,000. Those are not covered by the leaking underground storage. They would not be covered by the leaking underground storage tank program. They are eligible for potential brownfield revolving loan funding. And part of the discussions we've had with the state of Illinois is to understand the likelihood of being able to tap into the brownfield revolving loan fund program. And it seems like we've got written confirmation. We haven't applied for it at this point in time, but it seems like this is a perfect fit for that program. They have funding availability that they could assign to this program or to this property. And the maximum amount of funding that would be available would be up to $600,000 worth of funding. It is a no-interest loan, generally for 10 years, and 30% of the loan could be relieved at the end, or generally is relieved. It could be. It's common for the 30% of the loan to be relieved at the end of the loan period. The final investigation that Terracon performed was a site investigation, inspection, and sampling of a variety of building materials on the property. I think there were 88 different samples that were taken from the various structures on the property to identify if any of those building materials had asbestos-containing elements that would need to be dealt with specially and handled and removed specially before we would demolish or anybody would demolish the buildings. And in fact, there are asbestos-containing materials. One area that is pretty extensive is the mastic or glue that holds down the floor tiles. Throughout most of the buildings have asbestos-containing materials in them, which means that they would have to be removed carefully by a licensed asbestos contractor before the properties would be demolished. And there's some additional regulated materials, some of the PCB or some of the ballasts and fluorescent lights need to be taken out and disposed of properly, which results in some additional costs because it's more handwork than just having a big backhoe crush the building and haul it away. The long and short of it is that the asbestos and other regulated materials that have been identified in the property would increase the demolition costs by about $47,000. I think the total estimated demolition cost based on some bidding that we had preliminary done on the property is somewhere in the neighborhood of around $70-some thousand with the additional remediation and demolition costs associated with the asbestos and regulated materials. So here's the long and short of the financial aspect of moving forward with this project. The total project, the call, is all costs, all in, to actually acquire the property,
That's paying the owner, legal, consulting, all the consulting work that we've done up to date, paying the back taxes on the property, closing costs. All the demolition and remediation costs that I just talked about are all part of the total project costs, is $1.25 million. Of that, we're anticipating that realistically the city's share could be about $500,000 or $600,000 if we're able to tap into the revolving loan fund program, and we get some reasonable contribution from Phillips 66, which they've so far offered $30,000. We think there's probably room there for them to offer more, but they have offered $30,000. If the city just relies solely on just receiving money through the LUST reimbursement program, the city's share of the cost would be closer to $920,000. There's some other funding that might be available through DuPage County Stormwater Division for water quality, for kind of floodplain mitigation type of improvements that they often have access to and then distribute. Right now, there's none available in that program, and there's always, in the past, we've had some success in tapping into state legislative initiative, member initiative funding that they are able to kind of delve out to their community constituents. Wanted to just briefly talk about risk considerations, what kind of additional risk or liabilities the city might inherit if we do move forward with this project. There's a detailed assessment that's included in the agenda. Backup is Exhibit D that was prepared by our environmental attorney. Unfortunately, he had a long-standing prior commitment, so he could not be here this evening. He has committed that if there's liability risk questions that the City Council has that you would like him to be here to address, he'd be more than happy to come back at a future meeting to address those directly. But his overall summary based on all the interactions that we've had and his evaluation of all the information that's been generated is that we've identified, quantified the city's potential exposure, and he believes it's very manageable. He shared with me in the context of other properties, this is pretty clear cut of what we'd have to deal with, so there's not a lot of opportunities for upside costs. Thus, his statement that monetary exposure with the unknown is not really that substantial from his perspective, and especially in relationship to other projects that he's been involved with. So at this point in time, staff is recommending that the City Council postpone making any decisions on whether or not we would move forward with the closure of this property. And the main purpose of postponing that decision is so that we could continue the work that staff could continue the work that we're embroiled in right now, figuring out what the proposed budget will be for next year. Obviously, whether you're looking at, not the best case scenario, but the better case scenario or the most costly scenario for the city, it's going to be some significant expenditure on the city's part, and it's going to be over multiple years. We want to make sure that before you would be put in a position to make that type of decision, you have a bigger understanding of the overall budget picture and a more clear understanding of what staff would be proposing as the detailed funding program for this particular project. And that's all going to be wound into the whole budget process that we'll be talking with you about and presenting to you over the next few weeks. So that's why we want to postpone the decision at this point in time. Postponing the decision does have some contractual issues that we would like to talk with you in closed session about next Monday. So that's the second part of the staff recommendation. Next Tuesday, you're right. It is the 18th though, right? Yes, next Tuesday. So that concludes my formal presentation. As I said, our environmental consultant, Mike, last name Mike? Lawrence, is available to answer any questions as well as I am.
Thank you, that was very interesting. Wow, a lot to think about. Questions, comments right now? Alderman Goodman?
If I remember correctly, there was a revolving loan for brownfield site remediation that the city pursued in recent years, which wasn't, if I remember correctly, supposed to be 30% forgiven, but was in fact supposed to be entirely forgiven. And our state finances were not adequate to the task. Is that correct?
That was I don't remember, it was I don't think there was ever a promise that it was 100% forgiven. It could be 100% forgiven at the time. But you are correct that we did receive an award for, it was a couple $250,000 revolving loan fund. We never accessed those funds because that was when the state didn't have a budget for several years. They were furloughing employees. It's really funding that gets run through the state. It's federal brownfield remediation grant funds, and it gets run through the state. And at the time, the state wasn't in a position to effectively administer that program, so the federal government said, we know you awarded funds, but you guys aren't administratively in the position to effectively implement that program, so we're holding back on those funds. So we were never able to access those funds, and it didn't make sense for the city to delay progress on that project until the state kind of got their budget in order and the federal government would release funds to them again. That issue obviously has been addressed effectively, and the state has been administering the revolving loan fund for the last several years without any hiccups, using funding that's allocated from the federal government. The federal government has adjusted the parameters so that the maximum potential that you can have relieved is 30% now. In no case could you ever get close to 100% of the fund relieved of a loan.
So the federal government had the money, and we did the cleanup, and we didn't get paid back as we had expected to do so. And going forward, we'd be relying on the same program, which admittedly the state is in better shape now, but they're not even offering as much money back as they were then.
Right.
So,
Well, I would say one clarification I would point out is that it wasn't that the city was banking on, made the decision to move forward to clean up based on the fact that we were going to get the funds and we did the work and we didn't get the funds. At a point in time, it became clear that we weren't going to get the funds, and the decision that the city had is whether or not we were going to wait and see if the funds became available at some future time, or we were going to proceed knowing that we weren't going to get the funds. And the decision was that the city, I think, in hindsight, it made sense, and things have worked out that the city made the decision, we're going to go ahead and clean up the property regardless of whether you're going to give us the funds or not, or a portion of the funds. I mean, it was only a part of the overall costs.
yeah, it was only a part of the overall costs. And that would be true for all the different pieces you're talking about here as well. So if any one of these funding sources fell through, we'd still be on the hook for a lot more. Can you talk to me a little bit more about this iron, in the water? You said that this was the only part of the environmental assessment that was a surprise.
Mm-hmm. You know what, it might be better, Mike, are you prepared to talk to that? Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Lawrence with Terracon. What your question about iron was?
Well, just that this is the only part that was a surprise. And I have yet to see in our years of doing cleanup on other property, environmental costs and remediation costs ever come out lower than we expected them to be. There always seems to be a surprise and a new thing that costs more than we thought. And the next time you go out and look, and here's another tank, and the next time you go out and look, here's a new type of contamination.
Right. And yeah, I understand. The iron in this case, I guess would have been a surprise in the sense that, the overall use of the property obviously has been a gas station for many years, so iron obviously in that sense would be unexpected. But also, the way that you can deal with the contamination through Illinois EPA is either going for a comprehensive NFR letter or a focused NFR letter. And Ron had mentioned before that in this case, we would be dealing with the site as a focused NFR letter, so we would be dealing with essentially all of the contamination that you normally would be in a comprehensive, just subtracting out the iron so that that part doesn't have to be dealt with through the program. So you still end up with an NFR letter that's protective of the property and a good sign for the property and going ahead with the residential uses of the property as well.
So when Ron said that we're not certain it isn't elevated naturally occurring or that this property is the source of that contamination. Does that mean that as we go forward with the cleanup, we'll find that out? Is that the sort of thing that is likely to be clarified? Or is this the sort of thing that's just going to be undetermined indefinitely and we're just going to try and paper over the risk?
If we were to go ahead with the focused identifier letter, we wouldn't necessarily be testing anymore for iron. There wouldn't be a need to, because that wouldn't be part of the closure letter that we would be seeking for the property. So it wouldn't be necessarily resolved through that.
So what are the circumstances under which this property might end up being the source of contamination for something like that? How likely is that?
I don't think it's likely. I mean, from what I understand, the property was filled in a long time ago. It's probably the source in the area, I would assume, of that iron in the area. It's not, there's no known point source or anything like that that's contributing iron to this particular property.
So when it was filled in, then the contaminated heavy metals in the dirt were the source of this contamination and we just didn't know it was there, but it's been there all along and isn't likely to change?
Yeah, that's possible.
Okay, so what are the potential liabilities for being the source of contamination like that?
Well, I don't think that Mike can really address that, but that is something that we've had discussions with the environmental attorney, and again, might be worth having him come back and address that specifically, but in the conversations we've had, his position was generally that because it's really unclear whether or not it is high iron specifically related to something that might be underground on this site, or is it just high iron that exists in the surrounding area. Warrenville does have pockets of the community that has really high iron in the groundwater, or if it's some upstream or adjacent property that the groundwater is moving towards this property with high iron in it, that there's really no way to pin the high iron on this property, and there are really no cleanup standards that the state has. They have surface water quality standards that the groundwater iron doesn't meet, and technically could, as it migrates to the DuPage River, not meet those standards. But they don't have any rules or regulations in place that would require anybody to address groundwater or groundwater that has iron that exceeds those standards.
Okay, and you said it's just above the current water quality safety standards?
I don't know if it's just above. I don't remember the details of how that was modeled.
Yeah, so the iron would have been above what the Illinois EPA calls their Tier 1 remediation objectives. So the good thing is, even though we wouldn't specifically be addressing iron itself, you're still going to be essentially putting in institutional controls and engineered barriers that will relieve a lot of the same issues that would cause exposure to the iron. So, there won't be, obviously you're not going to be putting in a well on the property and pumping water out of there and exposing anyone to iron or any other contamination at the sites. There's basically the restrictions will be still in place. It's just you won't be necessarily specifically addressing it for iron.
Sure, I understand that you're not specifically pumping water out of this location, so if the contamination is in this location and it doesn't, I suppose, migrate off the site into other areas, then it wouldn't be an issue for the drinking water, correct?
So when we did our modeling with iron in the Phase 2 supplemental reports, this is what Ron's getting to. The modeling does predict the iron to go towards the river and meet the river, and that's where you have to do modeling essentially to see, is it reaching the river at a level that is above the surface water quality criteria, which is very low for iron. It's like 1 milligram per liter dissolved, and so it's a very low level. It essentially migrates to that point at above the surface water quality criteria.
Okay, that's very interesting. So, in your opinion, this isn't an issue?
The iron, it's in our food, it's in our everything, so it's not really that big of a deal. I mean, if we were talking one of the petroleum contaminants getting into there and going down to the river, that would be probably a different thing, you know, but essentially we're talking about iron, and I don't think that anybody really worries that much about that.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying about the petroleum. I think I was driving by the day that the testing was going on, or one of the days when the testing was going on, and let me tell you, the smell as I drove past the site was quite. I could see people pulling things out of a hole and sort of a splash of water going up, and there was probably some water sampling going on, but boy, the stench of petroleum, it hasn't smelled that bad when I've been going by there since, long before the gas station closed. And
right.
yeah, I mean, exactly. But yeah, by comparison, that's a more serious problem to have to deal with in the contamination on that site, would you
yes.
say?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Davalos?
Okay, so checking off the iron, there are, what we're talking about here, there are petroleum contaminants and heavy metals in the groundwater, so not the iron.
Right.
So my big concern that I talk about every time this comes up is the river and how much work has been done on the river. So do we assume, I suppose this groundwater can flow all kinds of directions. Can we assume that it's advantageous to take care of some of this stuff? Can you get that stuff out of the groundwater? Or how do you protect the river from the petroleum contaminants? How is that?
From the petroleum contaminants, we essentially what we do is we take the concentrations of the, what we've tested on the site. We plug that into all of the models that are out there for predicting how far it will flow until it meets what they call a Tier 1 remediation objective, which is a stringent standard implemented by Illinois EPA. And so what we see is that the petroleum contamination, based on what we have, the data we have right now, is not migrating and reaching the river. So you wouldn't have that as a risk, and that would pass with Illinois EPA. That would, they're the ones that prescribe these models for predicting the downflow to those particular, in that down gradient direction, I mean.
So we wouldn't be concerned with taking it out of the groundwater, just taking it out of the areas in the soil?
Right.
I mean, we ultimately want to get rid of it, right? That's one of the big...
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Because to me, that's pretty important, so thanks.
Anyone else? Questions or comments? Motion? Motion? Oh, Alderman Widener, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to recommend the city council postpone the city's decision on whether to close on the purchase of the former Citgo gas station property, and 2, conduct a closed session discussion of amendments to the current real estate contract at the city council's February 18th, 2020 meeting.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Widener and a second by Alderman Davalos. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Number 8, consideration of authorization to begin recruitment process for summer engineering / stormwater intern position. That would be senior civil engineer Christine Hocking.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Over the years, staff has identified a need to proactively coordinate with stormwater detention basin owners of their responsibilities to properly maintain their basins. Many times, these aging basins have been forgotten, or the homeowners associations or owners don't really know how or what maintenance is required to perform on these detention basins. The result is a reactive response from the owners, and then a extra effort that staff has to take to investigate the drainage issues, look back into the files from 20 plus years ago to try to find the as-builts for the detention basins, and try to figure out the next steps to help the HOAs and the owners. The main focus of the engineering stormwater intern would be to catalog the over 100 detention basins that are in the city limits, to create a GIS database with the locations of these basins, owner information, sizes, etc. All the information that staff would be able to readily pull up when an issue came up, and in order to help proactively respond with these homeowners. The intern would also go out and inspect these basins and start that catalog of information and work with the owners to describe best practices for maintenance of the basins, including checklists and proper procedures throughout the year. This proactive result would result in less drainage complaints, less flooding issues, and prevent unnecessarily high costs for the owners in the future to fix these basins. We've had a number of these issues this past year with different owners of basins and HOAs, and some of them have had to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars trying to fix issues that they could have prevented if they've done the maintenance ahead of time. In addition to all this work, the intern would also assist with updating and maintaining the city's utility GIS database that Phil had mentioned as part of their work program, and assist in day-to-day engineering and public works operations like soil erosion control inspections, minor drainage complaints, minor permit reviews, things that an intern from college could perform. This position is included in the proposed FY21 budget and is a decision package. However, we're requesting to have City Council authorize staff to begin recruitment efforts due to a very actually highly competitive engineering intern season. There's a number of engineering companies that already have interns, a number of other municipalities that already have posted these positions out there. And we want to obviously get an intern before the summer time begins. Staff feels like this is a relatively small expense in the budget, and it is more cost effective than obviously hiring an outside consultant to perform the work. However, if council feels that it should be discussed with other budget items later this month, then it can be done at that time. However, we are recommending that City Council authorize recruitment efforts at this time.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions? Alderman Winder?
Yeah, I think we need to get the jump on this and advertise for the position right away. I make a motion to recommend the City Council authorize staff to begin recruitment efforts for a summer engineering stormwater intern in Community Development Department.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Alderman Widener and a second by Alderman Davalos. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Number 9, consideration to adopt a resolution supporting the DMMC 2020 Legislative Action Program. That is for City Administrator Coakley.
Yes, thank you. You see in the packet a copy of the 2020 Legislative Action Program. As you'll notice, if you remember previous years, this is a consolidated, it's really a one-page both sides, a document that can be easily handed to legislators. They have expressed great appreciation from our legislative reps that it's not multiple pages and details. It used to be a whole booklet and all kinds of information. They pared it down to the very simple overriding themes of restoring full local government distributed fund revenue. If you remember a few years back, they trimmed back what municipal and local governments were getting. Then when the tax increase went through, they never brought the municipalities back up to the level that they had, where local governments did not get an increased share of the higher revenue that we're now paying in taxes. Our local residents are paying it, therefore the belief is it should benefit the people more closely for their local governments. I don't want to go through all these items, sorry. But preserve local authority, so decisions are made at the local level more likely than not. The city councils and the village boards know the residents better and what they should do. You can see the different things: investing in infrastructure, protecting public safety, retirement, taxpayers to keep on working on the improvements that they're making with those retirement funds. Made a big step this year, but there's a lot more work to do. And protecting and also doing some changes to workers' compensation, so there's fair compensation for workers that are injured, but there's some cost controls for especially local government, but also would affect businesses. So there's a little bit more detail on the right side of the page. Again, that would be the back side. This is the front. And the DMMC is requesting that all its member municipalities, of which Warrenville is a very active one, adopt a resolution showing the city council's support for that. So it adds some credence to it. It's not only the DMMC, but also all its members that are behind it. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, I have to say I was very surprised not to see a mention of small cell wireless facilities on this list, because I know that local municipalities have been discussing that as an important legislative priority. I don't know what your involvement has been in the DMC creation of this plan, but maybe you can speak to that.
Madam Chair.
Coakley, Mr. Coakley.
Thank you. Yes, that would, we didn't get into that fine point with this. There's a lot of legislative specific bills. There is actually a bill about that DMMC is proposing to modify the Small Cell Wireless Act that was passed about a year and a half ago to give more local control over some of the we're going to get into a little discussion in a few minutes when Kristen does her presentation and update, but to have better control over our rights-of-way with the way that they're coming in. They were given almost carte blanche. We have the opportunity in a very limited amount of time to review what they're planning to do on public rights-of-way, city light poles, et cetera, but really no control to say no unless it's a dangerous situation. We get a very modest amount of money for the expenses we have to do, et cetera. So there is that. It falls under the local control heading. A lot of things will get rolled under there, so we don't have to be so specific in every single item, but local control over public rights-of-way that are in the municipality is a key issue, and it falls under, I just flipped the page as I was talking. Well, it falls under that broader heading, so it would fall under there. It's not something we've forgotten about. My involvement in it is that I am the director or the chairman of the Regulatory Issues Committee this year and last year, and that is an item that is right under that committee, so we've been working a lot on that with many, many issues. You'll get a little bit more, again, from Kristen's update on some of the things going on countywide, but DMMC is very much involved with small cell, but as I just said, it falls under the local authority. If we put all the specific fine point granular bills under here, this would be multiple pages again, which they've tried to pare down.
Sure, I appreciate that. I agree that falls under the local control heading, but it also mentions things like in Illinois infrastructure, but just says roads and bridges. So anyway, I'm definitely in favor of restoring LGDF funding and preserving local authority on so many issues that relate to municipal impact. So I would like to make a motion to recommend that the City Council pass a resolution endorsing the DMMC municipal legislative positions and priorities for the 2020 legislative session.
Second. We have a motion by Alderman Goodman and a second by Alderman Bevere. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Excuse me. Okay, number 10, consideration to adopt a resolution supporting House Bill 3851.
Me.
Oh, okay. City Administrator Coakley, please.
I'll lead off on this, and as you know, resident Mike Smith is in the audience. This was raised by Mike last week with the council talking about, and the council voted to direct staff to put together this resolution. It shows support that the city council to request the Illinois legislature to make this modification supporting House Bill 3851, which would then roll back that fee to a more reasonable amount. And Mike has provided all that information to you that is also in the packet tonight and spoken about it several times, but it was done in error, and this is a correction to that problem. If you approve this, then we will send it on to our local legislators, the DuPage Mayors and Managers Committee, conference, so that they're aware of it, and then can certainly send it to all the legislators and the chair of the Rules Committee that was mentioned tonight.
Any other questions or comments? Alderman Ashar?
I'd like to recommend the City Council pass a resolution supporting House Bill 3851.
Second.
Any other comments? We have a motion by Alderman Ashour and a second by Alderman Vivier. Comment by Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, I don't think this is an appropriate item for a municipal position. I think that there are a lot of legislative priorities that residents should definitely come to our meetings, publicize their concerns about, ask people to call their representatives, and that's a very appropriate use of public comments in a public forum, but not to the extent of spending city staff time drafting resolutions and taking positions on non-municipal issues like this. I don't think it's appropriate, and I'm going to vote against it.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Motion passes. Okay. We have an update on small cell wireless facilities. We have management analyst Kristen Youngmeyer.
Good evening. Recently, in the beginning of the year, I attended an update on the deployment of small wireless facilities that was given by DuPage County's Transportation Committee. Part of that presentation was just giving an overview on what the facilities are, what kind of technology is this supporting. They gave an overview on different state and federal legislature on the deployment, and then addressed kind of some concerns or questions that has popped up around the technology. I'm sure you've heard it in the news. And one of the reasons this is talked about is this technology is expected to be deployed within the next 12 to 16 months, pretty widespread. And so they're just working to make sure people are understanding what this is going to look like. And I'll also provide you a status update on what that currently looks like in Warrenville. So in general, when it comes to wireless technology, I'm not going to pretend to be a savvy technology person, but we're currently in the 5G, or the 5th generation, which supports the technology of things. And so what I mean by that, it's supporting technologies like that take kind of traditional items and now they're doing more. So an example of that would be like doorbells. They're no longer just to let you know somebody's here. They act as a security system. Speaker is no longer just to play music. You can order your groceries from it. So it's supporting that kind of technology, and small wireless facilities are able to create more capacity, and it's important that these can provide data in real time and respond kind of instantly. So if we look at how earlier generations have traditionally been supported, it's through towers that you can see maybe on, water towers or those bigger structures, and they can cover about several miles. Small wireless facilities will only provide coverage for a few hundred feet. I think maximum's around 1,000. So when these are deployed, they're going to have to be deployed in larger numbers, and obviously you'll see more around. And the next slide just kind of helps. Oh, right. Yep. For Warrenville, if you see them, they'll likely be on street lights or utility poles, but they can also be installed. The company can also install their own pole to put them up. And so those are just kind of some examples to help give you a visual again, because kind of when I started this, I didn't even know what they looked like. So it's kind of helpful to have an idea of what you'd be seeing. For Warrenville, there have been, Verizon has received a permit, as well as AT&T, to install a small wireless facility, and there's currently 15 sites also being proposed. So just want to point out, the majority are in the Cantera area. There is one, is this working?
Asterisks on top. That button.
Oh, okay. over here on Barclay Avenue. That's, I believe, the Verizon one that's been approved. And so this is where we're at now, but just expect in the future that you may see more and more of these. As far as some of the concerns the public has brought up, like health concerns, there hasn't been any robust studies to really prove that that really is a concern at this point. They've been asking council just to be aware of what this technology is and be able to educate the public. Those were some of their asks. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
I'm sorry. Alderman Davalos.
Right, so they'll maintain their own equipment, even though it's on, okay. It looks like these red dots are Verizon new standalone wooden poles. So they just put up their wooden poles. Do they have to pay attention to anything, like if there's a visual in traffic or if it's in the way of something, or are there any restrictions at all on what they can do?
The only restriction we really have is they can't block sight lines. But as far as aesthetics, there's really no other things we can control. And with the acts that have been passed by state and federal legislature, it really limits local government to have any control over what's being put up. And I think the original intention was to promote competition and help these technologies improve with that competition. So that was the original intent in limiting local government from being able to say somebody can't, or to prohibit somebody to installing these these facilities.
So it looks like here we have AT&T and Verizon. Will we have Sprint coming by in the future? I mean, could be, or any other of these companies, I suppose?
I'm sure that could be a possibility, and
Okay.
I know in my notes, DuPage County did pass a wireless telecommunications facility ordinance to try to encourage responsible siting. So I feel like maybe they are trying to engage these companies in a positive way. I think some challenges they've had with that are a lot of these providers are not willing to share their deployment strategy, so it's kind of hard for them to see the full picture of what's coming.
Thank you.
So the issue is, if you live in a community that's been recently built and basically everything has been brought underground, they can come along and stick a bunch of poles in your neighborhood, and with no consideration.
As long as it's not providing a huge safety hazard, which is essentially blocking a sight line.
Okay, I guess the residents should be aware of what's going on. Okay, any other questions? Alderman Bevere?
Yeah, I know you don't have a lot to say, but the red dots, I understand the power lines are in the backyards over on Rogers Town Line in Forest View. But the one on Town Line, there are ComEd poles right across the street, because they got ComEd poles going down Curtis. But these other locations, there is no poles at them intersections. And it's just, I don't know if you could ever mention it to him, but you got a guy getting a pole in the middle of his yard that's never had one. And he complained about it to me. And I don't know why it's 60 feet away, there's a pole. I don't know why they couldn't do it.
Director Kugler. Phil.
Thank you. We did try hard to encourage Verizon to co-locate on ComEd poles. They came back with the cost that ComEd would charge them to upfit or to make those poles suitable to put Verizon facilities on there are far in excess of what it would cost them to just put a pole in. So in talking over the city attorney, we can't prevent them from installing their own poles, and we can't make them locate on ComEd poles. I would suspect that AT&T with some existing agreements with ComEd might be more successful in locating on a ComEd pole, but Verizon and other carriers that don't have those current agreements with them don't. And so, and ComEd's not obligated to make it cost effective for anybody to locate on their poles. As I understand it, when Verizon went through and evaluated this with their consultants, when they are proposing a spot, they have some flexibility to move it like maybe 100 feet. So if we tried to direct them to a property line or to a corner as opposed to being right in the middle of somebody's frontage. That's about the amount of flexibility we have to help them within 100, or to direct them within 100 feet of where they're at, because they are very targeted in their study on where they need to be able to provide the service they're trying to provide.
And, kind of at the end of, I don't know, if there's nothing you can do, you can do. I just thought I'd bring it up again because it's, there's a pole close and there's nothing we can do, there's nothing we can do.
No, I agree, it's incredibly frustrating.
Yes. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Administrator Coakley?
Yes, thank you, Kristen. Nice job. I just wanted to add a couple of quick things. While all of these pole locations and any other new ones can and likely will be in the future 5G, most of them right now will probably be more the 4G nature because 5G equipment isn't really rolled out yet. So that's all in process, but stay tuned, it will be coming. The other thing is, to Alderman Berry's question, where the underground the underground utilities and there's no electrical or utility poles in your neighborhood, there probably are street light poles. That would tend to be the first option for the companies because it's a lot cheaper to go on our poles than it is to go and put in a whole new pole. So it will be less likely, no guarantees, they have the right, but it'll be less likely for cost-wise that they would go and put a new pole in an Emerald Green or a Summer Lakes or somewhere because there's existing poles to go on. The other thing, as you were referring to, as it currently stands, Verizon will not be going on any ComEd poles, even if they're right across the street. They'll put in their own new poles, or they'll give us a pole that we would have to maintain then, but we've told them that just adds the city cost. So they can add more locations. These are only the ones to reemphasize what Kristen and Phil were saying. This is just where they have permits and locations now. There may well be more. There is also federal legislation that supersedes the state law that we're dealing with, so it's a dual-pronged approach. Even if the state law was repealed, and it's not likely to, but it does have a sunset in another year or two, it was to get these rolled out. The federal government also takes away a different level of rights, which some of our state senators are working on a bill to try to get that back into local control. So when they say we don't have a lot of control of these right now, we don't have almost any control of where they go. That'll become an issue as they start putting these in and your constituents are contacting you going, who decided to put this ugly pole in front of our house? They will assume it's the city. And one thing I almost forgot, when you mentioned sight lines, that's about safety. They can't block your line for traffic or a safety issue. It doesn't mean they can't put it in front of your beautiful picture window where you can look out and see open space right now. Be careful the definition of what sight line means in that, just for clarification. So. Great technology, many people and probably all of us are going to be using and want to have that access, but there's some costs to be paid with aesthetics and some other things on that.
Alderman Goodman?
So based on this FCC declaratory rule, I guess my question is how effective is it going to be to lobby the state to try and change this ridiculous 2018 law? The 2018 law was actually sponsored by our former state Senator Connolly, who has been voted out of office. It was signed by our former governor, Governor Rauner, who has been voted out of office. The people who proposed this bill are gone, but the bill is still in effect, could be overturned by the current legislators and executive branch members who have replaced those people if we lobby them appropriately and say we want changes to this bill. But is the state government acting alone going to be able to change much? I mean, how much of the local control issue is still going to be constrained? Because given the time frame that you've mentioned, if these deployments are going to happen in the next 12 to 16 months. If we need a change, we need one soon. So I guess the question is just where do we focus our efforts to try and get a better situation?
Administrator?
You're very good points, Alderman. Several things. What the legislation that DuPage mayors and managers just proposed, it just got approved last week by the board, is to basically what I would call trim some of the rights of the the telecommunications companies in favor of more local control. Whereas if there's a historic district, they would have to consider that, so we don't have that, but in some towns they do. You can't just stick a really ugly pole in the middle of a district where it is historically significant and there's been preservation efforts type thing, to use stealth technologies to hide it as best as possible, make it look like something else. There's some examples. I'm not sure the aesthetics are something we'd like, but it could be made to look like a tree instead of just an ugly wooden pole, for example. So we're not proposing legislation to overturn that act. It is unlikely that that would happen from a practical standpoint, trying to give back more control over it, where they would have to respect this municipal rights more than the current law allows. That still leaves the FCC ruling, what I was calling federal. It's not legislation, it's a ruling that they're looking at overturning. Thank you for clarifying. We're also working with the federal government through IML, DMMC, and others to try to get that changed so it goes back, reverses the regulatory ruling, that's not a new legislative act, of the Congress, to give local control more consideration in the same way. But it's a two-pronged approach, because you're right, we still don't have a lot of rights, even if the state law should be overturned, and that's not even on the books or on the table right now.
Okay, very good. All right, any other comments or questions? All right, thank you very much for that information. On to number 12, consideration of bid letting and construction engineering for 2020 construction projects prior to approval of the FY 2021 budget. Good. Deputy Public Works Director Phil Kugler.
Thank you. I touched on this in my budget presentation earlier. This is something we do every year, requesting permission to go out to bid before the budget's approved. And again, we get favorable bid prices by going out to bid when contractors don't have all their work booked and they're hungry to get work. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions if you have them.
Alderman Widener?
Yeah, could we add an alternate bid for those streets that might be eligible for the complete streets policy guidelines that you would see in the future, just so we could get a figure on what the potential costs would be for, I think you mentioned Ray Street, and was it one or two others?
Well, Ray Street I wouldn't pursue at all right now
Okay.
with sidewalk, because there's a bigger project to be done later that will be paid for with TIF funds.
All right.
The challenge with adding any sidewalk, anything new, is how are we going to pay for it? The road program is generally funded by the CMRP, which is for existing infrastructure that we have, and taking care of that and maintaining and replacing that. In addition, sidewalk where there isn't curb and gutter right now, where there's drainage ditches and things like that, requires some extra level of engineering to be able to design and maintain the drainage appropriately and make sure the sidewalk can be installed properly. So I would say it'd be difficult to do because we don't have that engineering in place. So you're getting, it's not as simple as just saying we're going to have X number of square feet of sidewalk added to the project. There's got to be some consideration for design. So I would say this year it'd be really difficult to do that.
How about next year?
If we work through it wouldn't even, if there's a means to fund it and for it to be included in there, we could be looking at that for next year.
It just seems like there's an understanding with the strategic plan that these walkways and trails are high priority among the citizens and very much appreciated. And, you know, when you're out in the summertime, you certainly see those connections used. And I just think that we have the policy enacted now, that the sooner we could move forward to establishing the implementation would be good. And I think, you know, I don't know what the cost would be, so it's hard to consider cost alternatives or where the funding might come from, but it would be good to understand what the cost would be per individual streets. You know, I know they all have their distinct personalities and challenges and everything, but one by one, it would be good to understand that.
It'll be part of the discussion when we go through the implementation plan.
Okay, thank you.
Administrator Copley?
Just to clarify on that timing, I understand, Phil, we could get it done for next year, but there's a point you got for that design, so to avoid getting in the same catch-22, I guess, next year, you would have to know the direction from the council to get it in front of engineering design to be ready to go out to bid, I would assume by late summer or early fall. Is that correct? Just as a time frame to work towards that?
Yeah, we'd need to be sometime next late fall, early winter, actually designing the sidewalk to be included in the project. So yes, we'd have to have some decision or direction from council in late
So
summer.
you know to tell the engineers to go do that extra
Yep.
work, I would guess by the beginning of fall to back that time up, but
Yes, that's correct.
you're the guy running it. Thank you.
Alderman Goodman?
It just seems to me that during the implementation steps and working on what the progress under the Complete Streets program is going to be is the appropriate time to have that policy discussion at a council level about whether those particular implementation steps have support and an appropriate level of funding. And I think that then any particular project needs to be considered in the context of the larger budget. So this isn't the right point to add these roads, I think, and it's not really the right point to say, oh, let's hire engineers to do this work next year. It's going to be at the point when we're discussing particular implementation steps of our Complete Streets policy, which unfortunately is not quite where we're at in that project. It's been a work in progress so far, and we're just not. I think you're jumping the gun a little bit. You're eager about this issue. I understand that, but it doesn't feel like the right time.
I guess I just feel a sense of urgency because of what you hear from the individuals out there that, you know, as much as we could expedite these projects, I think it would be much appreciated for the, you know, type of people that we're trying to attract into the community with families and so forth. They certainly appreciate having sidewalks on the sides of their streets, and it's been called out in every citizen survey and, of course, in the strategic plan. So the sooner we could expedite it, I think the more it would be appreciated within the community. Thanks.
Yes, Alderman Goodman?
I think that the two examples that you've mentioned here, Riverside and Ray, are probably bad examples for that particular point that you're making. I know we had 20 people in from Ray Street at public meetings about development in that area saying that they did not want sidewalks on their street. Certainly not everybody on Ray Street feels that way. Certainly we haven't talked to them about it recently. But I just think that this is not the example where we want to be pushing ahead. I have a feeling that if we started jumping the gun on this particular project, we would have people here with picket signs who said that they moved into a rural community and they didn't want sidewalks.
Anyone else? Okay, a motion, someone? No? Alderman Ashour?
I'd like to accept staff recommendation and authorize staff to advertise for bids for the 2020 road program project prior to formal approval of fiscal year 2021 budget.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Ashour, second by Alderman Bevere. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. 13, consideration of GovTemp USA agreement for an interim executive assistant. Administrator Coakley.
Thank you. As you're all aware, we have a current vacancy in the position in administration. To fill that on a short-term basis, I had signed an agreement with GovTemps USA, something well within my spending authority. We have Dawn Privetti, who's serving as our interim executive assistant, but that expires the middle of this month, and we have a need to keep that position filled until we get to a point where we can do recruitment and determine how to fill it long-term. So council would be appropriate for them to extend this contract. Ironically, it is actually still within my spending authority, but I can't tell you at this point how long this might go on, so I'd rather have the council approve this agreement and we have it under the longer-term planning process. But I assure you that we will work, our staff, administration, the three remaining members of our staff will be working to get that position filled, so we won't have this ongoing forever. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Comments, questions? Alderman Goodman?
My only question is that Exhibit A cites the term of the position being January 22nd through February 18th, which is only a week away. It says trial period and may be extended, but I guess it already almost seems to be over. Does this need to be revised?
That is the first one that I had signed, the trial period. So you would be actually extending it. That's incorporated. Our attorney, Brooke Lenneman, has incorporated the trial period with the actual longer-term agreement so that it's all now rolled into one. As I was saying, I want to make sure the council's on board with this before I don't want to be extending the city's contract beyond, especially beyond my spending authority, but that's why it's there. That one is expiring, that's next Tuesday, so we really need that assistance going on beyond that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. Motion? Alderman Goodman?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council approve an employee leasing agreement extension with GovTemps USA through May 1, 2020.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Goodman, a second by Alderman Bevere. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. 14, discussion of FY 2021 citywide work plan. That would also be Administrator Coakley.
Thank you. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the meeting, based on some things we're working through with the budget, there are changes to the work plan that had been presented and you've had in your packet for a couple of weeks now. That's what this process is for, while the budget process is going on, to make adjustments. So staff is, after looking at this and the budget projections, again, which we will get into in a lot more detail on the 24th, coming up with a special meeting, and then ongoing all the way through budget adoption, we have made the changes. You'll see them. We've done kind of a red line version, or track changes, if you will, in Word document, where we've lined out those items and then moved them, color-coded them, et cetera, and moved the items that are being removed from consideration for the next year, fiscal 21, to the back page, which says these items will not be considered during that year. Something else, we'll leave it for questions. Staff is here, and Christina, our Assistant City Administrator, who has been dealing with this whole project with hands-on, can certainly answer questions, and looks very much like she needs to correct something I just said.
Assistant City Administrator, Christina.
Just one point of clarification. The current citywide work plan on the dais that is redlined, that was left up there, it still has a January 21st date. That should have been changed to February 10th, so I apologize for that at the top of the page. We have not moved the redlined items off to the projects not included page yet, because we were making these changes earlier today. So right now, we are just striking them through. That will be amended again. This citywide work plan as a whole, again, will be amended before the next meeting with any additional revisions, and we'll have it hopefully in final draft form for you all to look at before the February 18th meeting.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions or comments regarding the citywide work plan? Alderman Goodman?
Yeah, since number 19 has been crossed out, could you talk a little bit more about that? Update employee performance evaluation process and tools?
Okay, so yes, that one, we were anticipating the recommendation of a communications coordinator, which would have allowed us some additional time internally in administration to work on some of these other projects and move some of these initiatives up. Not having that position or the administrative temporary position that we originally had as well in the fiscal year 21 budget, we had to remove some of these extra projects that we just don't think we're going to get to in the upcoming fiscal year, and that was one of them. So it's still something that we need to do. We have an evaluation tool. It's a bit outdated. We've been talking about updating it for a while. It's just not going to happen with this coming year.
Okay, so when we talk about things like the Public Works item restructuring some of their staffing, and when we talk about having the staffing and service study results, it just seems like a very timely project. I was happy to see it on here to begin with, and I'm very sad to see it crossed off.
Yes, us too.
Um,
We'll work through more of the details as we get more into the budget process. We'll have some more discussion.
Yeah, so just to follow that exact point, we also seem to be moving back the facilities study, which also coordinated with this. Is there going to be negative feedback, I guess you'd say? You know, how sometimes you have something builds on something else, where when you delay, not only is the services and staffing study being delayed, but then the time period between those two is going to be delayed, and then the delay of the final project, once we finally get the facilities study done, might not be taken at the same time or with the same people responding. I mean, I'm trying to see how these two things are gonna work together and how much of a problem it's gonna be.
So to some degree, they are separate projects in that we're going to have to do a completely separate request for proposals on the facility study, and we'd be looking for more of an architect-type consultant to work on that. So, but the interrelation occurs with having the results of the services and staffing study, having an implementation plan, getting the feedback from the council and the approval on the action items and what we're going to pursue will then feed directly into that facility study. So we can't really move forward with a facility study until we finalize the services and staffing piece of it. Because of the delays with that, we don't anticipate having a final report to you until probably later, again, this fiscal year. Before April 30th, we're hopeful, but then we have to have discussions about here's what they're recommending, what do we actually want to implement from this study and what makes sense and in what time period, looking at a longer projection of the different budget years and what other projects, competing priorities might be going on. If there's staffing changes, some of them will be more immediate priority recommendations, some will be longer term. And so once we have that, we'll be in a better position to determine what we're looking for in a facilities study. But again, due to some of the just budgetary constraints that are coming up with fiscal year 21, and I know we keep saying that and you haven't actually seen it yet, but that's really what drove the pushing that back a year. There may be some ramifications to that with the delay of the services and staffing study and the delay of the facility study, but we'll be in a better position to really talk about both of those things once we have more information and we have a final services and staffing study and the budget in front of us.
Okay, I mean, it's the sort of thing where I'm concerned when there might be extra costs for things that we put off doing, and I suppose this might not be a great example of that. I hope not. But yes, by all means, when we have our special meeting on finance, we're going to have to discuss this more, so I won't get into it now because it's 10 o'clock at night, sorry.
Okay, that was, any other questions, comments on that? Okay, that was for review. And then the last is the number 15, Public Works FY 2020 Work Program and Decision Package Status Report. This is, I think, a review. This is just a review. Does anyone have any questions about this? As long as we're here. Okay, that was just for review. We have nothing under miscellaneous, and all I need is a final motion. Alderman Goodman?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you and good night.